Good evening. Welcome to the Public Safety and Government Operations Committee meeting. In attendance today, we have, of course, myself, Chair of the committee representing the 4th District, Councilman Burnett representing the 8th Districts, Councilman Cohen is excused, Councilman Costello is excused, Councilwoman Porter of the 10th District, and Councilwoman Ramos of the 14th District. Representing the Office of the President. Who do we have on the line? Do we have anyone on the line from the Office of the President? All right. No, sorry, Preston Lewis. Okay, Preston Lewis representing the Office of the President, and Nina representing the Mayor's Office, Nina Themlis. So the committee today will hold a hearing for Resolution 22-0088R, informational hearing on CSX coal silo explosion for the purpose of inviting representatives of the CSX Transportation Incorporated under the general law of the laws of the Commonwealth of Virginia, the Baltimore Fire Department, and the Office of Emergency Management to investigate the cause of the CSX coal silo explosion that occurred on December 30th, 2021 in Curtis Bay, to address what is being done about air quality in the area and how an incident of this type may be prevented in the future. This resolution was introduced on February 7th, 2022, and it was sponsored by Councilwoman Porter. I'll turn it over to Councilwoman Porter for opening statement.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Generational outcry, missed opportunities for accountability and enforcement and social change. The residents of Curtis Bay and the citizens of Baltimore deserve better. No effort has gone into making the actual changes requested by the community. Additionally, no effort has gone into improving the quality of life of South Baltimore residents, homeowners, business owners, and other members of the community who for decades have been begging for change. South Baltimore communities like Brooklyn and Curtis Bay have borne the brunt of this urgent public health threat, often getting hit first and worse. And now, the Curtis Bay Community Association is empowered now to be on the front lines of climate change. Companies like CSX and other industrial facilities have a moral responsibility to prioritize the health of the communities that are in direct contact with pollutants produced from their facilities. We have seen this type of reckoning with harmful substances like tobacco and opioids that have created generational harms in individuals, families, and communities. Too often, our local and state governments have turned a blind eye to this public health threat, more so in communities of color and low-income communities. To help address these long-standing wrongs, municipal, state, and federal actions must advance bold environmental justice legislation. We must ensure that our environment is safe, habitable, and healthy for future generations. Federal, state, and local governments often regulate pollution at the individual project level. However, these decisions, like the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and so many other laws do not sufficiently address Baltimore's cumulative pollution levels, resulting in dangerous environmental and health impacts. This incurred fine against CSX is simply an outcry of generations of long-standing racism, environmental injustice, and lack of government intervention on this grave public health threat. I wholeheartedly, within all of my power, intend to work with the community to spearhead more enforceable actions, collaborating with Mayor Scott, other state and federal partners, and industry to ensure that we not only produce rhetoric, but continuous, actionable, and tangible and enforceable action toward this particular public health threat. Across the city and our nation, our air and water are being polluted with impunity and with great consequence to our health and environment. South Baltimore communities are heavily impacted by health disparities, unemployment, and poverty in a way that its proximity to polluting industries like CSX must be called into question. This is the first step of a very, very serious conversation that I intend not only to hold myself accountable, but also the municipal, state, and federal partners to ensure that not only we prioritize the health of this community, we prioritize what this community has been crying out for generations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman Porter. So just to give you a sense of the flow of this hearing, we're going to have a presentation from a couple of community members before going to our agency reports. We'll go first to the fire department, then MDE, then have an opportunity to hear from CSX, and then we'll open up the floor to questions from the council members before then going to public testimony. So first, I'm going to turn it over to the panel, the community members that came out to present today.
I'd like to formally recognize Dr. Heaney and Ray Conaway from the Curtis Bay Community Association. Dr. Heaney, his affiliation is from Johns Hopkins University.
Where should I look for slides?
Please speak clearly into the microphone, state your name, and you may begin.
Certainly. Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Councilwoman Porter, and members of the council for allowing me to be here this evening on behalf of the Curtis Bay Community Association. My name is Ray Conaway. I am the co-president of the Community of Curtis Bay Association. I've been a resident of Curtis Bay for 23 years and served on the board of directors for the last year and a half. The presentation that I have that will be followed by Dr. Heaney illustrates both incidents relating to the day of the explosion and afterwards what citizens and residents of the neighborhood of Curtis Bay are experiencing on a daily basis with the operation of CSX literally in our backyards. This chart here outlines in data terms the life expectancy of residents of the Curtis Bay neighborhood. You'll see that compared to neighbors in Upper Roland Park or the Greater Charles Village, you have a life expectancy between the ages of 73 and 82 years old. But compared to residents of Cherry Hill and Curtis Bay, that expectancy is just 69 to 70 years old. And these are neighborhoods separated by a matter of 5 or 6 miles in relation to geography. Sure. So we have a switch up here on slides.
You have the link to the other side?
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you so much. Before I move any further into the presentation, I just want everyone to examine this photograph for the context that rests deeply within this photograph. We see in the upper right corner the Curtis Bay Recreation Center, and right in our direct vision is a playground. And far off in the distance is a coal pile. And this represents the proximity that residents are dealing with as it relates to the coal from CSX. This is less than 700 feet from where children play, where families gather to socialize in our Curtis Bay Park and our Curtis Bay Recreation Center. So the work of the association, along with the South Baltimore Community Land Trust, has been on the ground organizing and advocating and collecting the necessary testimony and information from residents who are experiencing the day-to-day public health threat that CSX is posing to the thousands of residents who call Curtis Bay home. In our work of organizing, we've spoken to nearly 500 residents who have detailed to us their experiences and the health challenges that are being fueled by the work of CSX. There are two main themes that I want to make exceptionally clear throughout the presentation. First is that this explosion, nearly 9 months ago, is one of the most dangerous in industrial history, along with the fact that no accountability has come forward to those who are responsible for it. Secondly, the dust that enters the community on a daily basis. Please do not get lost in the thought that this was a one-day occurrence. This is a daily occurrence, sometimes hourly occurrence. Has been reported as a threat to both public health and a nuisance by the standards of the Maryland Department of the Environment. That is a metric regulated by the Maryland Department of the Environment to regulate it as a public nuisance. The photographs here clearly demonstrate what life is like for residents in the Curtis Bay neighborhood. These photographs detail the day of the explosion, and that black that you see is the remnants of the coal as it fell onto residents, that's a woman's forehead, sidewalks, and people's vehicles. A white vehicle completely dusted with black coal. As the video illustrates, this explosion rocked homes, businesses, property, where the thousands of residents, including myself, felt the shaking of the ground. And as this person describes in this quote, it was almost like a bomb went off. It actually rocked this whole block. This was one nasty explosion. It was almost like a hydrogen bomb went off. Hydrogen bomb. Intense. We're talking about damage to property. We're talking about the trauma that folks are experiencing. This picture illustrating shattered glass, and this is just one of countless examples. Myself, immediately after the hearing, myself and the councilwoman actually had an opportunity to walk up and down Church Street where we were able to see with our own eyes the shattered glass of businesses and homes throughout the community. As this resident states, the recent explosion happened blocks away from where we live next to Benjamin Franklin High School, but it felt like something ran into the house or like the house collapsed, which was a scary feeling, and you're always on guard. You don't know if something is going to blow up or if it blows up, how it's going to affect your house. We're talking about the post-traumatic stress that residents are feeling 9 months removed from this incident, where they are concerned that if something like this happens again, it could be even worse danger and damage.
I've lived in Curtis Bay my whole life, and this is what we're dealing with now because of the cold thing. You can see all this stuff just is so caked on, and we're just breathing it all in. It doesn't matter. You clean it, and it's wet before it even dries. It's black again. I mean, we're breathing all this stuff in, and it's like, I know a lot of people that they're all dying from cancer. They've all been born and raised right here in Brooklyn and Curtis Bay. It doesn't matter how much you clean it, it's dusty before you even, it dries everywhere. Like there, I mean, look, it just falls off. Look at that. Like really, one little weight, that ain't no pushing, that's no nothing. Look, steady handed. You know what I mean? It's terrible. It really is. Look. It's from the coal mines over there, whatever, that's been here for years. Like, the kids run around and they have sweat coming down their face, and it's just big, giant beads of of black dust just everywhere. You know what I mean? So if they're sweating it, we're breathing it in, like it's not any good. It's not. I mean, it's disgusting. No matter how, like on the outside or the inside, it just, look. I'm sorry, it just was a big old thing. I mean, and that's just, so it's terrible.
I think the quote that says a picture worth 1,000 words does not stand in comparison to this video. As this resident states, my kids have asthma. I don't open up my windows because of the dust, and it's usually black dust, so naturally I think it is coal dust. So I don't open my windows because it comes into my house and then everything is black. CSX is actively contributing to the decreasing quality of life for residents in Curtis Bay. It's evident in the video, it's evident in the pictures. The photographs show the remnants and the buildup and the collection of dust. As the woman stated in the video, you wipe it 1 hour, the next hour it's back. This, again, is a daily occurrence for residents who have to live in this shadow of this industry. This resident talks about how they had a pool for their grandson to enjoy, but the black soot sat on top of the pool, sat on top of the water and around its rim. So they had to wipe it off every day, or even empty it in some cases. In the window, if you open the window, it's black all over every day, and it's been like this since they've been a resident of Curtis Bay. This resident talks about how they have yet to open their windows in the 10 years that they've lived in our community. They realized that it was coal dust coming into their house, and they didn't want it in their house, so they shut the windows and they keep them that way. I know it's a little hard to read, but that sign the writing on that white vehicle says, "I survived the coal blast." Survived the coal blast. No one should have to survive a blast of any sort in any of our neighborhoods, but again, this is the daily reality of residents in our community. I have been able to illustrate for you the human and the quality of life issues and nuisance and disturbance and threats that we are experiencing because of CSX. Dr. Haney will now exhibit the health, the environmental aspects and injustices that are taking place and their collaboration with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Conway. As you hear the concerns that were identified within the community, they form as what we do in my department at the Bloomberg School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins University, research questions that we can begin to investigate. And so we have been in a collaboration with residents in Curtis Bay and South Baltimore, and thinking about ways that we could collaborate together. And this was a collaboration that started long before the event on December 30th, the explosion, but it really catalyzed the need to look objectively at air quality in the community, to come up with a partnership so that we could do it at the level and the scale that would be relevant to what the residents were bringing up as their concerns and their lived experiences. So that led to this community-driven air quality monitoring project in Curtis Bay, Maryland. Chris Heaney, I'm here, associate professor, who's leading the effort from Johns Hopkins University. But it's a diverse group. It's a big partnership. It's partnership directly with the residents of the community of Curtis Bay Association, the South Baltimore Community Land Trust, other faculty and students in my department, some of them are here today, and also folks from the Maryland Department of the Environment, the scientific team, the Air and Radiation Office, technical experts. So we've been, since about March, meeting regularly, weekly, with this team together to talk about how could we investigate some of these concerns regarding air quality. Also should mention University of Maryland, Dr. Jacoby Wilson is also part of this collaborative partnership. Okay, so a big part of what Mr. Conway mentioned about differences in life expectancy between neighborhoods, there's a lot of factors that could be at play, but the environment is a key one. And so here in South Baltimore, Curtis Bay, as you've heard repeatedly about the concerns around air pollution and all the diverse sources of air pollution that are in a community, what can we do? Why are we making measurements, and what are we measuring in the air? So a lot of it is around particulate matter, different sizes of particles, larger particles that we call PM10, and other particles that we call PM2.5. And the world over, we know that there are relationships with health effects, significant burden of disease and death that's related to particulate matter air pollution in the air. This is unequivocal. It's just here the question is, can we make measurements in the relevant space, place, and time to be able to bring some evidence behind the concerns that we're hearing from the residents. So here we have PM 2.5. We also can measure things within PM 2.5, things like black carbon, which are a reflection of the smaller and darker particles, which can be generated from partial combustion, that is, vehicles that have combustion engines, or also from darker particles that could be coming from coal sources. So we set out to look into the air quality concerns in the community and set up these goals. And a lot of it is in response to what we were hearing from residents on the ground for decades, but also precipitated by the events of the explosion. So since March, we've been meeting and planning and talking, and since about May, we launched some air quality monitoring goals, and that's to figure out how the coal terminal and other facilities might be impacting air quality in Curtis Bay in South Baltimore. And then we have some longer, mid to long-term goals, which is to help understand the cumulative, all of the impacts of these multiple diverse sources of air pollution in Curtis Bay and how they might affect air quality in the community and health and quality of life. Also, to work together with partners to figure out how to sustain this community-driven air monitoring work in Curtis Bay and have the community be a big owner in the process to keep it going. And then ultimately, we want to share information, and that's why we're here today. We want to share information with all the diverse stakeholders and policy decision makers. Okay, here's an example of what our setup looks like. It takes advantage of the air sensor revolution. There are these low-cost sensors now, which you can locate within the community. You can have data that's fed up to the cloud through cell signals. It doesn't require Wi-Fi of residents, which is a big barrier in underserved in communities of color. And it also comes with now solar panels, so we don't have to draw power from residents, which is a big deal on fixed incomes. They're quite small. They don't take up a whole lot of a footprint, so this is just to give you a sense of what we're setting up at one of our locations. Here's a sense of where, since about May 25th, when we set up our first monitor, where we're monitoring the community. They're numbered 1 to 7 from the distance to the nearest edge of the coal terminal. So you can see we have one location just south of the coal terminal, working our way westward into the community of Curtis Bay. 2 and 3, 4 and 5 are co-located, so there's actually 2 monitors where you see the 4. And then 6 is the farthest residential location up in the northwest. And then towards the east, you have the farthest industrial site. Former residential, no longer residential, and it's an industrial area in Fairfield-Wagner's Point. So we're gonna zoom in a little bit just to give some context, and the scale is covered up, but we're talking about literally hundreds of feet from the coal terminal here. And you'll see here also the Curtis Bay Recreation Center at the top of the photographic satellite image here. So we're really talking about air monitoring at the scale where the residents have been speaking about their concerns related to the acute event of the explosion, but also ongoing concerns with the potential for dust to be disseminated into the community. Okay, here's just to give you the sense of the complete distances. At our nearest monitor, which is a place of work, it's 230 feet from the nearest edge of the coal terminal. And then we go all the way down to the farthest former residential and now industrial site, about 4,200 feet from the coal terminal. So what have we found so far? And this is preliminary, but we're seeing already since May 25th, when we've been operating this hyperlocal air quality monitoring network, that the levels of air pollution are changing as the wind speed and the wind direction is changing. What do we mean by that? We see that PM10 levels go up, get higher as the wind speed increases. We also see that there's higher PM10 levels whenever the wind's blowing from the direction of the coal terminal towards the location in the community where we're monitoring air pollution. And that's compared to periods when the wind is not blowing downwind from the coal terminal towards the community. So we'll just give one visual representation of that here. Let me orient you to this. On the y-axis, going up and down on the left, you see the levels of particulate matter 10 going up, okay, as you go up from 10, 100, and 1,000. You can't see it because of the transcript, but on the y-axis, it's wind speed, and it's going from low on the left to higher wind speeds on the right. The vertical line, the red line on the far right, is 8 miles an hour. That's the speed at which, as we understand it, is the speed when there can be an automatic triggering of the sprinkler systems at the coal terminal to potentially help wet the coal pile. So Now let me walk you through the middle sections. We have two lines, a red squiggly line with gray confidence intervals around it, and a blue one. The red line are the periods when the wind is blowing from the coal terminal towards our air monitor. And you see that the levels at PM10 are going up consistently. You see that with the red line. And then the blue line is all those other hours when we're monitoring when the wind is not blowing from the coal terminal towards our air monitoring location. So you see a really sharp increase in the PM, the particulate matter 10, when the wind is blowing from the terminal towards our air monitoring location. And it's statistically different. That rate of increase is statistically significantly different than the periods when the wind is not blowing from the coal terminal towards our air monitoring location. So this is just a preliminary finding that we're going to continue to follow this monitoring approach and look at other parameters. This is wind speed, but also look at some of the other air pollutants that we're measuring that can help us identify a profile that might be unique to certain sources, including coal dust sources. And that's the second major preliminary finding. Along those lines, we're trying to use what we call ground truthing. What is ground truthing? It's when people in the community, as we heard from Ray, are seeing things, trying to speak out, talking to their neighbors, and saying something. Well, we want to work with them to take those ground truth visual observations and note the time and the date. So we happened to be out one day. This is a photo, you can't see it, from, I believe, August 5th in the afternoon. And when we were out just checking on the air monitoring network, we noticed something different at the coal terminal. There was more coal piled up along the southern edge of the coal terminal on this particular day. Typically, you see the towers above the new construction office park there, the gray building, but you can't typically see a whole lot of the coal, actual coal, above those buildings. But on this day, we saw it was accumulating on the southern edge, and we saw that from different vantage points as well. This is just on the southern edge of photo, where we also, in addition to the height of the coal pile, we saw some activity. We saw some bulldozers moving coal around on that particular day. So when we hone in and go back to our air monitoring network time series, let's zoom in on that period. At the bottom, you can't see it, but the far left, where I'm going to pull up a little red box, is that day, August 5th, when we were out there and saw the change in activity. So what do we see with three pollutants? Top is PM10, the same one I showed you earlier with the wind speed and wind direction. So we see a spike at that time in PM10 levels, okay? That's shown there at the top in the red squiggly line going across. Now, black carbon is something that is more specific to partial combustion, or it could also be specific to particles that are just darker. And so we see that there was also a spike in black carbon. It's really significant to note that that spike on August 5th is in contrast to the really smooth lower level, the average level of black carbon on the rest to the right. As you go from the red vertical box to the right, it's quite low. So that's a pretty significant spike in black carbon. And if it were coming from vehicular combustion, we also believe that we would see the very bottom panel, a spike in carbon monoxide. But we don't see any demonstrable spike in carbon monoxide during that time period. In fact, it looks very consistent with the squiggly lines and the trajectory of the average levels in the community. So this is one preliminary example of what we think we can help bring to the table and continue to hopefully bring some evidence that might be able to provide insights on the concerns that we heard from Ray and the residents. So the next steps, we want to keep going. We want to sustain this air monitoring approach in Curtis Bay and South Baltimore, build the capacity of the residents to be able to understand it and do it themselves, and to be able to potentially hand it off so that the residents could maintain this for the future, to be able to monitor the safety of their environment and the air that they're breathing every day. And also as they try to push forward economic redevelopment visions of their own, as we heard from Councilwoman Porter. We also want to continue to ground truth scenarios to identify air pollution profiles, like the one I showed with PM10, black carbon, and carbon monoxide, so that we can get better at figuring out the profiles that we can attribute to specific sources. And then finally, we would like to continue to regularly check in and share preliminary data and information, both the residents, stakeholders, and policymakers. And with that, I thank you very much for your time and inviting us to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Conaway and Dr. Heaney. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge Councilman Glover has joined us via WebEx. Before we jump into a couple of other presentations, next we've got up the fire department, but I just want to make sure we get in our agency reports before we jump into that presentation. And so I'll turn it over to the Mayor's Office of Emergency Management, which I guess may be presenting with the fire department, but just want to.
Thank you, sir. Deputy Chief Wallace, on behalf of the Office of Emergency Management, good evening, community members and committee members. We have answered the questions that we were asked to follow up on, and we continue to stand by that report, sir.
Thank you. And also the city solicitor. I guess to just stand by the report, Nina.
Yeah, they continue to stand by the report as this resolution is the proper way to have this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, from here, we'll turn it over to the fire department.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Kim Washington on behalf of the Baltimore City Fire Department. We stand by our report and our follow-up agency questions that we answered, I believe, on June 24th.
Thank you. And next up, we've got the Maryland Department of the Environment.
Good evening, there we go. Good evening, Councilman Conway and council members. I'm Devin Dodson. I'm Assistant Secretary of the Maryland Department of the Environment. With me is Chris Hoagland. He is our Director of the Air and Radiation Administration. And thank you for allowing us to speak with you today about Curtis Bay. I'm a proud city resident, and I understand, appreciate, and empathize with what the residents of Curtis Bay have felt and have dealt with for decades. And at my department, not only do I serve as the Assistant Secretary, I am also the Environmental Justice Officer. And in that role, I guide the department's internal and external actions to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so this concern and the outcome of what has happened subsequently is of distress to me as the Environmental Justice Officer. It's really important for my agency to make sure that we do everything that we are legally allowed to do to protect the citizens of Maryland, but particularly areas of underserved and overburdened communities. So to that end, what we have done prior to the explosion is we've taken a multi-administration approach in Curtis Bay. Our air, land, and water administrations are undertaking enhanced permit reviews, compliance inspections, and enforcement, and not only CSX, but every permitted facility in Curtis Bay. Let me say that again, every permitted facility in Curtis Bay. The Statewide Commission on Environmental Justice and Sustainable Communities that I staff is also planning to spend a full day in Curtis Bay so that they can then go back and hold people's feet to the fire for regarding the actions that need to be taken in Curtis Bay. Through the recommendations of that commission, actually, MDE prepared an environmental justice screening tool, and I understand that one of the questions was, is Curtis Bay considered an environmental justice community? Nowhere do we define environmental justice communities in the law. We define environmental justice, but what we do define is overburdened communities and underserved communities. And we're able to map those in our environmental justice screening tool. And guess what? Obviously, Curtis Bay falls in that overburdened and that underserved definition, that statewide definition. So through those recommendations, the commission will, again, make sure that MDE does what it's supposed to do, and the residents, hopefully, will have an opportunity to really drill in with that commission and have that commission's have their back going forward. And MDE also has their back as well, and you're going to hear about that directly from our air director, Chris Hoagland, who will be able to talk to you directly about our actions vis-a-vis CSX. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. Chris Hoagland, city resident and air director at MDE. As air director, I oversee the department's air pollution activities, air pollution regulatory activities. So I'd like to give an update on two topics. One is how MDE is participating in the community partnership that we just heard about. And then the second is what we're doing specifically about the CSX facility. So first, for the community partnership, MDE, we are actively engaging in that partnership because the Curtis Bay community is facing environmental injustice. Among other things, it is overburdened by air pollution. So we want to be part of a solution to that to benefit the community. So we are doing things within exercising our authority through that partnership, but also lending expertise. So one of the things we're doing to exercise our authority through the Curtis Bay partnership is through an enhanced compliance and oversight initiative that Devin mentioned. What that means is effectively that we're sort of pulling inspection resources and inspector resources from throughout the state and concentrating them in the Curtis Bay area over a period of time. So this summer, we decided we're going to inspect and visit every single source of air pollution in the area, and our colleagues who do water and land pollution are doing the same. There are about 65 to 70 individual sources that were on our list, ranging from large ones like the CSX facility to small ones like gas stations. And churches that have a boiler for their heating system. And so we've been visiting every single one, and we're nearly done with these extra inspections. An example of areas where we're not using our authority, but we're trying to contribute in other ways, are the hyperlocal air monitoring project, where our experts in air monitoring are helping to calibrate the sensors, cite the sensors, interpret the data. We're trying to support the community's effort to deploy that, and the university's effort to deploy that, and then how we can all, as that gathers more information, how we can interpret it and turn it into actionable information. We have seen quite a bit of success building a hyperlocal air monitoring network in the Cheverly community that's up and running. It's providing very useful data about what's happening in the community, and we're looking forward to, as this network in the Curtis Bay area grows and we get more monitors covering more area, generating more data, we'll be able to take action based on that data. And then for the CSX facility specifically, we took enforcement action against the company for the December 30th explosion. We are in discussions with the company for settlement, so I can't say too much since those discussions are ongoing, but generally some of the things we're hoping to achieve are, in lieu of fines to the department, we'd like to, see an investment in the community, and so we're listening to the community associations about what potential projects could be of benefit to the community. Again, discussions are ongoing, so I can't really say exactly what the outcome will be, but that's our hope. Also, we're processing a permit application to replace the equipment on the north side of the facility that was damaged in the explosion. Through that permit and through an upcoming renewal of the overall facility's operating permit, we're hoping to see several improvements to fugitive dust management, to actions that are oriented towards pollution reduction, but will also help with explosion risk. And we're also looking to develop some monitoring at the site on the fence line that could complement the community network that's going up, so that we can be getting data from throughout the community and also the fence line to understand what's coming out of the facility, what's going in the facility, just simply traveling across the facility, for example, so that we can look holistically at the community at this facility and all of the other relevant facilities' contribution to air quality challenges. And so there will also be corrective actions. I imagine we're going to hear more from the company shortly about actions being taken specifically to address the explosion risk and the outcomes of the investigations. I'm happy to answer questions from the MDE side as well when the time comes. But given that, looking forward to working with the community to improve outcomes and also answering of your questions. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. And we will likely have questions for you guys later on. You're welcome to sit up here in the meantime instead of going back into the gallery. Thank you. Next up, we'll hear from CSX.
Good evening, Chair Conway, Councilwoman Porter. Thank you for having us here, Councilwoman Ramos and Councilwoman Glover. My name is Brian Hammock. I'm Director of State Affairs for CSX Transportation and a City of Baltimore resident for most of my life. Here tonight with me is Alik Young. Mr. Young is the General Manager for CSX Coal and Ore Terminals. And also with me tonight is Tom Livingston, Vice President for State and Community Affairs for CSX. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the City Council tonight and residents of Curtis Bay. The Council invited CSX here tonight to report on the investigation into the cause of the CSX coal pier explosion that occurred on December 30th, 2021, and how to prevent such events in the future. I'd like to begin tonight by addressing both of those points, and then welcome your questions. Based on a thorough investigation by nationally recognized experts in blast forensic investigations, determined the cause of the explosion was a localized buildup of methane within the conveyor belt tunnel used to load coal to ships on the north side of the facility. It was determined that an inadequate ventilation led to the accumulation of methane. CSX has followed the lead of experts in the field of industrial hygiene to implement safeguards to ensure that a similar incident does not happen again. Those safeguards include installing new industrial ventilation fans in both the north and south reclaimed tunnels to increase fresh airflow by up to 20 times the current levels, implementing extensive air monitoring inside of both tunnels for gas and particulate matter concentrations during our operations to ensure that levels are well below industry standard safety levels, and including shutdown of operations if conditions present a safety hazard. For the past 6 months, we've been conducting this air monitoring within the unaffected south tunnel of the terminal, and we have not had any elevations that would cause a safety risk and require a shutdown. The coal piers have been an important part of Baltimore's waterfront for 140 years. Not only does the coal moving through the piers help to provide power to Baltimore City and Baltimore County, in these difficult times in Europe, surrounded around the war in Ukraine, Curtis Bay is increasingly being sought as a source of coal to offset supplies cut off from Russia. In Curtis Bay in Baltimore, we are helping support our allies in the European Union. Throughout the years, our employees, including myself and Alik, have valued the opportunity that we've had to work with the Curtis Bay community, from construction of the fields at Baybrook Park to our work with the well. We have a template for how community and neighboring businesses can work together for the community good. As Councilwoman Porter said to me months ago, none of that matters if the residents don't feel safe in their homes. We want to work with you. We want to join the work group to continue a dialogue with the community and with your community experts. There are 12 Title V facilities within a 5-mile radius of Curtis Bay. There are many industrial partners that should be at the table, and we're willing to help bring them to the table so we can work together to help improve the community. I look forward to the opportunity to work with the Curtis Bay community in the days, weeks, and months ahead, and I thank you and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hammock. We're going to open up the floor to the committee for questions. I'd like, if possible, you can have a seat, probably in the front row, for folks who may have questions of you. And feel free to use the microphone, of course, and that goes for everyone. As you speak, please speak into the microphone. Mr. Hammock, you said that the cause of the explosion was methane buildup in the tunnel. Can you explain why that happened or why that was allowed to happen?
So the cause of the buildup of the methane was determined by the investigation to be an inadequate ventilation within the tunnel. So the buildup was allowed to happen because of inadequate ventilation to move either fresh air into the tunnel or the gases out of the tunnel. So the solution to that, the mitigation that we're implementing is to increase the volume of air that moves through with ventilation to move the entire airflow of that tunnel through. So it's 20 times what we currently have, and that's based on the recommendations from the industrial hygienist.
Is that a new problem? The ventilation issue in that tunnel, is that a new problem, or is that something that we knew to potentially be an issue given?
I did not know it was an issue. I'm not aware that we knew it was an issue. But if I have to correct that answer, that I will.
I ask because I think, of course, one of the core purposes of this resolution is to make sure this doesn't happen again. You know, I think just hearing from the community last time, there's clearly already a ton of frustration with the dust and otherwise. We certainly would rather a cleaner energy perspective or opportunity in the area, but that's not what we have. What we have there is coal, and I think that the big concern, or at least one of the big concerns, is how to make sure we don't have these explosions again. And if we did not foresee this problem this time, there could be other problems that exist. And I'm really curious what assurance we can have, even though we've identified this problem. Maybe we knew about it, maybe we didn't. How do we know that this whole operation can't have this problem again in the future, or some other spark or otherwise that could lead to another explosion?
Thank you for the question. I think part of the solution here is, continuing the work with our regulatory partners, both at the state and the federal level, and then with the council. I think the council does have a role to play here. We are working closely with MDE now, as MDE mentioned in their testimony, on our construction permit and what mitigating acts we have to take to prevent this in the future. Based on the investigation, it was a ventilation issue that led to the buildup of methane. We believe that will correct the problem. This is an unprecedented event in 140 years at the coal pier. I understand the testimony from residents that I watched from the last hearing of issues that they've had in the past. But as it relates to this explosion, that's an unprecedented event at that facility. And we need to work with the community more to help with the problems that they experience on a regular basis. But we feel like we've identified the cause of this incident, and we have adequate safeguards put in place.
I have to respectfully disagree. I don't think this is an unprecedented event. I think this is actually a pretty common event. And for those that testified in our last hearing, I tend to give our folks who give testimony 2 minutes. We try to get through 2 minutes for each person, and unfortunately, there was one person who came up to testify for which they could not get through all the explosions that had happened at this site over 2 minutes. I repeatedly asked that person to wrap up her testimony, and she still was unable to do that in about 5 minutes. This isn't unprecedented, and I think the urgency of the matter is one that can't be missed. And so I think we can't treat I don't think it would be fair to say that addressing this issue that we've identified here today, or that we're here today to discuss, this one individual explosion, is going to be sufficient to say that this won't happen again. I'm really worried about that perspective. You're free to respond if you'd like.
Thank you. As it relates to the testimony from the last hearing, my characterization of this as unprecedented, I was focused strictly on the coal pier. I understand the testimony. I listened to that testimony, and was moved by it. I heard the words of the members of the Curtis Bay community that night, and I know we will tonight as well. The incidents that were listed that night were from around Curtis Bay, but were not the Curtis Bay coal piers. So my focus of unprecedented was relating to the coal piers itself.
Okay. I want to direct the same sort of question over to MDE, and understanding, this is the explosion today. We know what the cause of the explosion was today. And you guys said that we're going to implement a number of actions to reduce the likelihood of this in the future, including air monitoring, hyperlocal air monitoring, and a couple of other pieces. What can we be doing from the regulatory perspective to make sure that this does not happen again? And once again, referring back to that testimony from the last hearing, there could be any number of things that cause an explosion or fire, certainly at this site. How are we thinking about steps in our partnership with CSX to make sure that this never happens again?
Sure. So as we're the pollution regulators, not the safety regulators. So there's just a nuance there to express where, like, as the pollution regulators, we expect facilities that we regulate and permit to be operating safely and not exploding, because among all the very bad reasons that explosions are bad, they cause air pollution, as we saw in this case, right? And that's why the air pollution regulators are taking the enforcement action related to the explosion. But there is some overlap there, right, between things you could do to address air pollution and also things that address the explosion risk. So as part of the facility's rebuild, in addition to the increased ventilation, there are other things. The methane monitors being installed in the tunnel. There are physical parts of the conveyor system to keep the coal contained. It's our read of the investigative report that it was some sort of mixture of methane and coal dust that was the combustible mixture inside the air to the tunnel. There's additional wet suppression. That's one of our major fugitive dust control measures at a facility like this, is keeping the material wet, so then less of the dust becomes airborne. And then looking at the facility as a whole, again, the fence line monitoring would be very helpful just for day-to-day operations. Hopefully we would never need the fence line monitoring system or the community air monitoring system to measure the impacts of an explosion. But it will help with day-to-day operations, we hope, at this facility and all of the other facilities. As many have mentioned, there are lots of pollution sources in the Curtis Bay area. That's one of the reasons they're overburdened by air pollution. And so we want to take these measures at this facility to improve management of dust just day-to-day, but also address the explosion risk, which you can never get to zero, right? You can never get risk all the way to zero. But we're doing everything, certainly we can, as the pollution regulator, to try to address both issues.
I appreciate that. Thank you, and thank you for clarifying that certainly it's not MDE's responsibility to take control of safety measures and the follow-through of safety measures, but there is that overlap. For instance, we were talking about methane buildup, and is methane one of the things that MDE looks into with regards to pollution?
That's not a pollutant we regulate from this facility. We also were not focused on methane in our regulation oversight of this facility until the reports indicated that methane was a part of the explosion. So that's something that we're considering internally, is what do we need to do about that? We regulate fugitive dust and particulate matter from this facility, visible emissions. People have mentioned nuisance. That's a general requirement in our permits. But there is not a specific methane regulation for this type of facility. We've been building methane regulations for different types of activities. We published one most recently for natural gas transmission system. We're working on one right now for landfills. And we are trying to take an approach to expand our regulation of methane in different contexts. And this is relatively new information for us about the role of methane at this facility, but we're trying to absorb that information and consider what to do about it.
That's very helpful to know. So you guys do regulate methane, just not at this facility.
That's
got it. Thank you. I will turn it over to the sponsor of the bill, Councilwoman Porter, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have one starting question before I go into my long line of questions. I just want to say, first, I'm grateful to the community for providing questions to the council members, and I think that it's an opportunity for you all to have your voices heard, not only through the council, but also to MDE, CSX, and also to the administration as well. And so my first question is a very simple question, and I'd like for representatives from each of the respective agencies that we have here to answer this question. So with your respective changes at this coal facility, would you live in Curtis Bay?
I would live in Curtis Bay.
You would.
It's a beautiful community, and I work in Curtis Bay.
Okay.
I do go to work.
Where do you
there.
live now, sir?
I live in Baltimore
You
County.
live in Baltimore, okay. That's good to know. Yes, sir?
So I grew up in Evanston Village in West Baltimore.
Oh, me too.
Yeah, I know West Baltimore better than I know anything else in the city or in the state. I would absolutely live in Curtis Bay. I have no problem at all with it. I mean, waterfront there too. The beauty of Curtis Bay is being a little overshadowed now by the issues that we're dealing with. But the beauty is there, and I absolutely would live there.
But could you breathe there?
I would try my best.
I live in Westfield. Very happy with my neighborhood and my house. Just enrolled our daughter in kindergarten, so we're not on the market right now. But I mean, it's like our hope that just professionally that we can be part of the solution to make Curtis Bay a nicer place to live. I've been to the community and I've seen it's got great bones and it's got challenges, but we can work through those challenges and make it a good place for everybody to live.
So, Mr. Chair, if I can, thank you, sir. I find that very, very hard to believe. I do. I find that very hard to believe that each of you sit here and you talk about the issues that are in Curtis Bay currently, knowing what these people breathe in and out, looking at these videos, knowing the reduced life expectancy rate, knowing the chronic health diseases that are impending, and literally sitting in these people's like system. You would sit there and say that you would still live in Curtis Bay. I find that very hard to believe, and I think that it is very flippant to the residents that are sitting here right now that you would even broach or even say publicly that you would live in a community that is known to have harmful pollutants and environmental toxins that are in the air every single day. I am deeply disappointed, and and I encourage you to search your souls. I encourage you to search your souls to understand what these people are going through every single day, not just for this particular explosion. Shoshana is her name. I want to speak her name. She was the one that documented a 100-year history of the issues, the incidences, the public health threats that were happening in Curtis Bay at the last hearing. My next question. Mr. Hammock, you talked about the tunnels that the CSX facility currently has. Can you share how long those tunnels have been in execution at that CSX facility?
I do not know the answer to that. I will get that information promptly to you and follow up with the committee.
Thank you. Can you give me a roundabout estimate? Have they been there since the coal facility has been there? Was it in the last 5 to 10 years?
I couldn't answer that. I apologize.
Okay. So let
I
me
will follow up with
Okay.
a specific answer to that question. though.
Okay, perfect. And then next about your quality assurance related to those coal facilities, and I'm a little bit alarmed that MDE is just now beginning to monitor methane. If we've had those tunnels there since the inception of that facility, and methane has not been even measured, what are you regulating? MDE, yes.
I'm sorry, I missed the last part of the question.
Yes, so I said that if those coal facilities have always been there, those tunnels have always been there, and we know that this is a known substance that has been building up in this facility, I'm gonna garner it with the assumption to say that, since the inception, why is it now that methane is just being regulated, and why haven't there been workflows of quality assurance to monitor that methane that should have been regulated on the front end?
Yeah, there should have been, absolutely. We should have, and we're going to require it now.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, may I ask an additional question? That wasn't my question. So my question is, if Why wasn't it being regulated before? We know that, I'm a public health scientist by training, and so I understand that methane is a known harmful substance that on the state level has been regulated. Why has it not been regulated at this facility if they have known for a number of years that this has been a buildup and potentially harmful, and to your point, Mr. Hammock, causing this explosion?
Yeah, I can't speak to how long CSX has known about methane buildup in the tunnels. As for MDE, it's a hole in our regulatory approach, and we obviously have to think about how to plug it. In the meantime, in terms of just controls at this facility, right, as part of the replacement of the destroyed equipment, and this is going to factor into the permit, there are going to be methane monitors installed throughout the tunnel. So we're trying to address it at this facility specifically. And then we need to consider whether we need methane regulation in this facility, this type of facility, to address that pollutant in addition to all of the others that are currently regulated at this facility.
So is MDE taking responsibility that they have not regulated methane? So I just want that to go on public record.
That's right. We do not regulate methane from this facility currently.
Okay. And so
We have not in the past.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to clarify a question with regard to, or rather a statement with regard to the methane monitors throughout the tunnels. Are those going to be MDE monitors, or are they going to be CSX monitors? Who's responsible for keeping up with those monitors?
Well, CSX is installing the monitors and will day-to-day basis use the information from the monitors to ensure that levels don't increase. I mean, we're requiring that they be installed and that they be sort of factor into the operations of the facility to address that risk. But one thing I do want to note is that the coal dust is also an issue here.
Right.
It was some combination of the two substances, and we do regulate the coal dust, and we require measures be taken to prevent it from becoming airborne, and that's why we did take enforcement action related to that's one of the violations upon which we took enforcement action related to the explosion. There were violations of the current requirements. Also note that, of the investigations, there was one government investigation by OSHA as the safety regulators, and they also found a series of safety violations that led to the incident. And so again, from the environmental side, we're taking action we can, given that there's overlap with the explosion risk, but there are also, safety issues that need to be complied with.
For clarification's sake, can you, who is responsible for the safety measures, making sure that this operation is safe?
So for the safety regulations, that's OSHA. And so OSHA, after their investigation in June, cited the company for a series of violations of safety regulations that entailed both fines and requirements to remedy the situation.
And so when we think about potentially explosive materials like methane or like coal ash, do you guys coordinate with OSHA, or is there any back and forth? We certainly have within MD the capacity and the understanding to keep track of methane. There may be other explosive materials, but we are literally talking about coal, like it's meant to blow up. Is there coordination there? Can we find some synergies to make sure that between the things that MDE is tracking or should track and what OSHA is going to be thinking about from an explosive perspective, from a safety perspective, that we can have some communication between the two, or three rather, of course, with CSX? Is that something we can think about?
Yes, absolutely. We've been in communication with OSHA since the incident to keep updated from them during their investigation. And so we will follow up with them now that the actions have been identified on the resolution of that. My understanding is that they're still going through the process with the company. But yeah, we will keep communicating with OSHA to do follow-up to ensure that everything is resolved on their end in terms of their enforcement action. And then try to get from them what they learned about what we should do going forward. Unfortunately, we didn't get a report from OSHA, an investigative report. All we got was the citations and sort of the rules that have been violated. But yeah, we will absolutely continue to follow up with OSHA to see what else, to ensure that what they've identified needs to be done gets done, and then to see what else needs to be done from their perspective.
Sure, I think it would be helpful, and if you could fashion this to the committee, a list of the explosive components of the coal operation. Of course, methane is sort of a byproduct of the operation, but all the other considerations that are explosive and we should potentially monitor to prevent explosions going forward, I think that might be helpful. And then thereafter, coordination with OSHA to make sure that we are meeting those standards and whatever additional precautions we should take. I think it could be helpful. And I apologize, I jumped in the middle
No
of your
worries.
questions.
No, I'll yield my questions to the other committee members. I have additional questions.
Thank you. Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councilwoman, for your advocacy for your residents. And I want to apologize for not being at the last hearing. I had a disaster in my district that day. Mr. Hammond, can you walk me through this? The coal comes from where?
The coal that comes through Curtis Bay generally comes from West Virginia, Kentucky, or Western Maryland.
So there are trains?
Yes.
Boats?
Trains. Well, they're
Trains.
trains and boats.
And boats and large trucks that bring the coal to Baltimore, correct?
No trucks.
No
so
trucks.
The trains load at the mine. They're transported to the pier. There are 3 coal dumpers that take the coal out of the train car and put it onto a conveyor belt below. It's then conveyored out to a control tower, which then puts it to the proper place on the pile depending on the customer's needs for that particular customer. And then it's conveyored under the pile is where the tunnels are. And when the ship is at dock, the coal drops down into the conveyor, into the tunnel, and then goes out to the ship for loading.
Gotcha. So which direction, so it comes from the south and then goes into Curtis Bay because that's the closest. Is that right? Because
The
I'm
train?
just trying to get, where the train.
Yeah, so the trains generally come, they're coming from the west, going through Howard County, and then up through the south, through, through the Wyman Park area, through the city, and then up to Curtis Bay.
I don't think it's going through Wyman Park. That's in my district.
Yeah.
So.
But just sort of that.
Morrow Park.
Yeah, Morrow Park area.
Okay. And then, thanks for I'm going to look at the map. So there's a large pile of coal. And as we saw in our colleague from Johns Hopkins report, even, forget the explosion, there's just the wind.
Right.
That is just carrying it elsewhere. How come we can't cover this in some way with a building, with netting? What happened in the 12th district when the MTA was idling their buses in a spot and residents had been saying, they had increased cancer, they had increased because of the air pollution from the idling buses. The General Assembly and the council worked at the time they now have a covered area where they can depot so that air doesn't happen. Can we cover it? Can we cover the coal?
It can be covered. I think that what we will find as we start this monitoring program, both the community program and what will come from a fence line monitoring program from our permit, is that we will have good data on what are the pollutants that are impacting the community most. We provided a sample of our coal to Johns Hopkins so they can start to really get data about what is inside of the coal. So then we can match it up to what we see in the air monitoring data, so we can determine, okay, so the coal pier is not a Title V facility, meaning it's not one of the largest polluters in the neighborhood. There are 12 within a 5-mile radius there. So there's no question that there are pollutants, a lot of pollutants going into that community. The question is, where are they coming from? And then how can we best address it as a whole community, business and residents and our public policymakers.
So I would imagine that you've had complaints about this for decades.
We certainly have had complaints.
And why haven't you addressed those until now?
We have addressed them through the years. We have a particular customer, I think the location of one of the community monitors is at a facility that had complaints about coal dust. They work on cars there. I'm not sure exactly what they do on the cars, but some high-end vehicles there. And we did put up wind screening in that area because we were able to determine that it, was the coal dust. I do want to share, I think one difficult thing that the community may have faced, and I'm not trying to speak for the community, but is that maybe it's tough to sort of get in touch with us. So I will share an email address that we've just established, and I'll be able to check, and others. Curtis Bay.
Excuse me, you're just establishing a public email?
For Curtis Bay, for the community, for the Curtis Bay community.
So, I'm sorry. You're just now establishing an email to contact you all because for decades, people have been complaining to council members, past council members,
Right.
And you hadn't had a way for people to get in touch with you?
Well, we
Really?
certainly have been communicating with the community for decades, just trying to make it an easier and more efficient manner for folks to make complaints. So we can go out and address it. We hear, I hear from members of the community complaints about coal dust. But we need some specific information. Where is it located? When did they experience that? That's helpful information for us to investigate it, or for one of the regulatory agencies to investigate it. We do want to work with the community. We do want to help address these issues, but it takes communication. It takes open lines of communication. And establishing an email address is one way that we can communicate, in addition to the other ways that we communicate, both with elected leaders and with members of the community.
So I'll just go back to my last question for this round, but going back to my question about, can we cover the coal? It is coal dust. It is hazardous. It actually doesn't matter what's in it. It's bad for you. Can we cover the coal dust and work with the other 12 areas to cover it? Build a building, put it in there, do something. Because having this out there polluting and people's windows, people's cars, and even if it wasn't hazardous with somebody with asthma, it would be bad for them. It's bad, period. We already know that. So can we cover it? Are you going to recommend that they cover it?
As part of the permit process, we're going to require an updated fugitive dust management plan. And so that will include whatever measures we find based on public input, community input, and consideration from the company of what would be effective at reducing fugitive dust beyond. Right now, it is not covered. It's left open and it's sort of kept wet.
That's right. It's left open.
Yeah, the solution is to keep it wet. And we understand, we get the complaints too, that there is something leaving the facility, right? There are effects on the community. And so we're hopeful that the new monitors in particular will give us more specific information. But then in terms of specific what to do on top of the piles while they're sitting there, which is most likely the source of that on a day-to-day basis, right? Wind going over the piles rather than anything coming out of the tunnels that are underground. Yeah, we definitely want to hear about additional ways to control dust from the piles themselves beyond what's currently being done, which is mostly keeping it wet.
And then I'll have a request for to talk to the law department about really what is our power to, I know it's MDE power to sort of regulate, but can we, because CSX is in Baltimore City, what is our power to do anything? So they're not here, so we can't answer that right at the moment.
I will pass that as a request to Nina Themelis to follow up with the law department. Since the law department's not, excuse me, passing it on to Nina Themelis to pass to the law department since they're not here today, if that's good with you. You had it.
And Councilwoman Ramos, specifically, we're already beginning that conversation about enforcement at the municipal level as well. One of the key things that has been alarming and disturbing is that we have our federal and state compliance and enforcement, but we do not currently have anything on the books at that level that it needs to be at the municipal level. And so my office is actively working on that in amendment to the Baltimore Clean Air Act.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'd pose this question to my colleague, who's a public health professional. Is there any amount of coal inhaled by residents that is safe?
Thank you so much, Councilman Burnett, and that's the sole reason why we had Dr. Heaney here from the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health to show that no amount of coal in any form or fashion is safe to inhale at any given time.
Thank you.
We have seen.
I got it. Because I think the concern that I have here, and this would be a question for MDE, because one of the things that are inevitable is wind, storms, hurricanes, and one of the things that we know is that these very severe weather events are becoming the new normal. One of the drivers of that is coal. And so the mere existence of the facility, in my opinion, is the challenge here. You know, despite the fact that, you know, we know that it's been here for 100 years, I'm sure that there will be arguments to be made about jobs and the economy and all of that, but none of these things will exist if the people don't exist, if they're suffering from tremendous public health difficulties in this facility. I believe, Mr. Hammock, you said it's been here for over 100 years, and so we know that there is an impact well, we don't know precisely what it is because it doesn't appear that it's being monitored to this point, and so my question to MDE is that at what point is there a trigger to close facilities? At what point do we move away from this?
It's a good question. And everything you just said is right, especially about the impacts of climate change and the role of burning coal in driving climate change. The question of whether the facility can export coal is a federal government question, right? And they have their licenses from the federal government. And the question of whether the coal export can happen at that location is a zoning question, which is, you know, a local issue, and I imagine was made long before any current members of the council were born, I assume. And so the state doesn't have authority then when they have the federal license saying you can do this and the local zoning saying you do this here. The state doesn't, we don't have the legal authority to say, no, you can't do this at all, right? That's already been decided at other levels of government. What we can do as the pollution regulators is say, while you're doing this thing that you are legally allowed to do, these are the measures you have to take to reduce all of the relevant regulated pollutants. Before I took this job a couple of months ago, I worked only on climate change. So believe me, I'm with you 100% about the role of coal consumption in driving climate change and the risk of severe weather that entails. Absolutely. Given the state's role versus the federal and local government and what we legally have the authority to do, I'm afraid that we don't have many options specifically in that regard.
Got it. The other question I had for Mr. Hammock as a follow-up to my colleague about the general storage and the lack of cover, which I would second, is something that I in research ahead of the hearing, saw that a number of facilities are looking at this, and a lot of advocates are calling for coverage of the facilities. But the question I had was, as the trains are moving not only through Baltimore City, but you mentioned that it's coming from West Virginia, other parts of the country, are the trains themselves covered as they're moving the material through communities across the country?
The trains are not covered, and again, that's regulated at the federal level. There is a chemical that the coal mines are required to put on top of the coal to keep the dust from coming off of the coal. So it's not just water suppression that we use at the facility. At the mine, they're required to put a chemical on top to keep the dust suppressed.
And do you know what the chemical is?
I'll follow up with you on that. I apologize. I do not know that.
And does your company monitor the box cars, or I'm not sure if I'm using the right terminology here, but the vehicles that are used to transport, are you monitoring what is coming off of the train while it's moving? Are particulates being monitored in that way as they're moving through communities? I mean, obviously you're trusting that whatever this chemical is being put on top of it to prevent that from happening. What quality assurances are made to ensure that, one, like, is there additional oversight to ensure that that is being done in the first place? And two, as they're moving along, the efficacy of the chemical, is that being monitored by your company?
So at the mine, they have regulators there that's an obligation of the mine owner. And then as it relates to the train, once it's moving, we do not have monitors in place, but train crews can monitor. We certainly get calls, about complaints, and that's something that's investigated. But there are not air monitors throughout, to keep track of that.
And what type of, I have one more question, sorry. Please. What type of complaints are you getting? As you mentioned that the people are complaining about the transports. Can you give us an understanding of what type of complaints those are?
Generally, the complaints are, related to noise, but, there are occasional coal dust complaints.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll wait for my next round.
Thank you. Got a couple of questions. Actually, quite a lot has come up, and I appreciate you, Councilman Burnett, for bringing up climate change, because I think it's a very relevant question, and it sort of brought to my mind just a sense for how much coal Mr. Hammack, do you know how much coal is moved through this facility yearly?
We are permitted up to 20 million tons of coal, and we do not export that, or we're not moving that much now, but that's the upper limit of the permit. I'd say it's more, probably half to, 60% of that.
Got it. And forgive me for not knowing all the ins and outs of CSX and what you guys do, but what percentage of the work that you do is moving in coal?
What metric would you like that in? So is it in terms of tonnage or in terms of man
percent
hours?
of the pie. So
Okay.
Percent of your, let's say percent of your revenue is tied to coal.
Okay. I do not know the answer to that, but I certainly can get that answer for you rather quickly, and follow up with you on that.
That'd be helpful. Do you ballpark 50%? 10%.
That's not my area of expertise,
Okay.
but no.
Thank you.
I don't want to give you a wrong number.
Totally appreciate that. I'll pass it on to my colleague, Councilman Porter.
Thank you. I did have a question aligning to that. How much revenue is generated from the operations of the coal facility annually?
That's another question. I do not have the answer to that. I apologize
Okay.
that I didn't have that level of detail, but I will follow up with you promptly on that.
Okay. This question is for MDE. Let me stick with CSX. Currently, CSX is not required to operate any of the air monitors at all at the terminal that measure air pollution that escapes from the facility. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, no worries. CSX is not required to operate any air monitors at all in the terminal that measure air pollution that escape the facility. So, you mentioned air monitors that monitor at the facility. They measure the coal at the facility. Can you speak to me about some of the air monitors, like particular in the community, some of the research that Dr. Haney is doing? Do you all have comparable monitoring systems like that?
We do not. So the two types of monitoring that I've talked about today is both inside of the tunnel as it relates to methane and the cause of the explosion, and then the fence line monitoring that's a part of our dialogue with MDE and with the community about what is the right fence line monitoring program that they would like to see. How do we make sure that our data marries up with one another, that we can make it the most productive use of those air monitor. Whereas the location, we were on site with MDE on Tuesday. I was not there, but MDE had staff there walking the facility, trying to determine what are the best places for those monitors.
And so can you speak to me, you mentioned numerous times in your presentation that, you know, you're speaking with the community, you're working with the community, you're monitoring the community. How are you gathering that data if you don't have the external monitors in the community?
So I just want to clarify about the working with the community. We want to work with the community more. We would like to be a part of their work groups. We think that, you know, it's a good way to have a dialogue with one another. If we understand the community's priority focus as it relates to, you know, the type of pollutants that they're focused on, or the type of testing or air monitoring that they're focused on, you know, we need to have that dialogue together, and having it go through an agency or another party may not be the you know, the best route. So we'd like, you know, to be at the table with the community.
Sure.
But as it relates to your question about the monitoring itself, we're not doing the monitoring now, so we have to establish that program. And that's going to take coordination and communication. And, you know, that's what I'm committing, that we're, you know, here we're ready to do that coordination and that communication. We're working through that process now with MDE. I know MDE is having a separate dialogue with the community, you know, about what the community would like to see. So I think once that, you know, once we're able to move forward together with, we know what is required, you know, we can put that in place, and then we can move forward together and making sure that we're sharing data.
Okay. For MDE, do you have a timeline for that?
We're processing a permit application now, and we're racing to get materials ready for public review, and then we can schedule a meeting where we can discuss it. We're also still in discussions on the settlement, and this could be relevant there too. So, and those, it's tough to put a timeline on that. But yeah, we are hoping to be able to show to the community potential monitoring requirements in the coming weeks. And in the meantime, we have been, again, continuously working on the community monitoring network.
Okay. And then this is a very elementary question. What is the mission of the Maryland Department of the Environment?
Yeah, to protect public health and the environment for the benefit of Marylanders.
Okay. And so do you think that you've done an adequate job protecting the residents of Curtis Bay with this impending public health threat at CSX?
No, we haven't. And I think that Director Hoagland made that very clear in his presentations, that we have a lot of work on at MDE's side to do as well, and that is why we have every administration participating in Curtis Bay, taking a look at all of those facilities, not just CSX, but all of those facilities, to make sure that we are doing our job too.
And so that was a very broad statement. I appreciate the response. Can you provide specifics?
Director Hoagland provided specifics already with regard to having, for example, our Land Management Administration come to Curtis Bay and look at whatever facilities it has permitted. The Water and Science Administration taking a look at the facilities that it has granted discharge permits or any other water permits for, and then the aforementioned air work that we've already been doing. So specifically addressing each facility's permit and what they have asked for from MDE to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do with regard to those permits.
Okay. 9 months later, do we have any outcomes related to something that can be delivered to the community with regard to enforcement, accountability, or even outcomes related to those assessments?
I mean, it's still early, but obviously we've talked about CSX, and I think Chris can talk about the others as well.
We don't have any enforcement actions for other facilities based on the recent round of inspections at the moment, except we are also engaged in an enforcement action in partnership with EPA for a petroleum processing facility just down the road, where there was, you may recall recently, there was a fire.
Okay, so there was a fire at a petroleum facility down?
That's right, a facility that, it's my understanding, they sort of clean out tanks. Or maybe refurbish tanks. In any case, we were actually, EPA was already in the midst of enforcement action with them, and we're partners with EPA on that. So that's correct, yes.
Okay.
And we'd be happy to follow up once we've completed this round of targeted compliance inspections with other outcomes.
Do you have a timeline for completion?
Yeah, we were going to do it this summer. We're almost finished making
Okay.
it through the entire list, but then of course we'd continually inspect the facilities after that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just following up on the train issue. About 10 years ago, there was a train derailment with coal in Ellicott City. Granted, the young lady shouldn't have probably been on the railroad, but that one of the particular young ladies was the daughter of the best friend of my husband. So obviously, the problems that we're seeing today, as well as experiencing that 10 years ago, and the fact that in the CSX train tracks that are in my district, which go up through Charles Village, underneath the school, and then go over Clifton Park, you know, we worry about all of what's going to happen with those. Is coal going through there?
No, coal does not move through your district, right? So coal's coming from the south into Curtis Bay, and then traffic that's going through your district is you know other than coal,
right? Other cargo that you
Right.
Ship out.
And I'm happy to give you a list. I can give a list of sort of the breakdown of the type of cargo that's moved and some percentages, if that's
That'd be
helpful for you.
That would be great. Thank you. I appreciate that. But the other piece of that is that I appreciated that you met with myself and community leaders in Chum and about some of the problems that we've actually been having with trash along the rail area, which doesn't seem to be resolved yet. So I guess my question is, I'm hoping that we can get a commitment from CSX, pick up the trash around the tracks. And I know you didn't cause it, but that's, like, I pick up trash I didn't throw it, but I pick it up. And so we want to, there's just all of these series of events, the trash, the derailment, the complaints from the community. It's really hard to have trust in CSX right now. You know, the wall falling down, in Charles Village, also in my neighborhood, this was a few years ago as well. So it's tough for us to trust. So tell me about how you're going to pick up the trash, but then also, how do you expect us as the council and as residents to trust that you're going to, I know MDE is going to monitor, but we need to have, you've got all these things that have happened to the community. So there's a real level of trust here that has been broken for decades. And I'm not quite sure how it can be repaired.
Well, to the question about trash, which is a topic that I talk to the council frequently about, I know there is a ordinance in process that's looking at the small hauler fees. One issue that we've identified as we investigate illegal dumping is that there is a network of small haulers in Baltimore City that sustain themselves with taking truckloads of residential trash to transfer stations. They have to pay a fee. If a city resident takes trash to a transfer station, they do it free of charge. If a small hauler goes to your house, takes your Baltimore City trash, and takes it to a transfer facility, they have to pay a fee. That fee comes out of their pocket. You add gas to that, and you add a helper. The margins are pretty thin. I've talked to a few small haulers about this specific issue, and if there's a railroad track nearby and a wooded area, it can become an attractive place to bypass the transfer station and dump it there. So Sisson Street's an example.
I think there was a pilot program put in place by DPW years ago at one of the transfer facilities. I think it would be interesting to hear from DPW what they saw in terms of did that have an impact on their enforcement of illegal dumping in the area. I
Well,
think
we're working on this issue.
Yeah.
We've said we're working on this issue. It's not just about the small haulers, it's about improvements to the transfer stations so that that's fine. I need you to pick up the trash on your land. So tell us about how you're gonna do that.
we do have a contractor that comes out when we have identified locations, and we clean it up. So, I've been out on where we've cleaned up 7,000 tires next to Harford Road and the high school. We have locations where we get a lot of trash built up, and those are projects. That was not an easy undertaking to get 7,000 tires off of a hill next to a busy road. But then it's just neighborhood trash that would collect on our facility, and that's something that we need to communicate and get it cleaned up. The other issue we face in the city, and this maybe goes to your point about the wall, is that we've existed here. The first mile of railroad was laid in Baltimore City. So there's a long history of railroad and this city. And through the years, some of the ownership of right-of-way, has gotten murky. So one issue that we face is determining who owns the property when there's, an illegal dumping. And generally, the city will say, well, I think that's CSX property, and we'll dig into the records and then, find that, well, it's either city property, it's ours. If it's ours, we'll take care of it. If it's the city, we ask the city to, take care of it. We try to be good partners with the city, but to the extent of cleaning up trash, that's something more that the city, I think, is prepared to do on their property than we are. To your point about trust, as important as trash. But trust, you're right. We have to do better. As I've said, I've been in this chamber since I was 19 years old on different programs, either as an intern in the mayor's office, as a staffer in the mayor's office, on various issues in my advocacy when I was an attorney. I hope that I do have a reputation with members of the council, and I hope that I say when I will follow up on these items and get you a fast response, that there's a level of trust there. And if we can start building on some small trust that we have, hopefully we can add that up into a larger trust relationship that we can move forward with.
No, I appreciate that. There's just time and time again, a lot happening, and just because you're the only entity right now doing this in Baltimore City and around the region, we need you to be a good partner. So, but the coal pile is a really big deal, and community is here, the councilwoman is, and the council is, behind her in making sure that this gets taken care of. But again, it's hard to say, how this is going to work if we've had all this history of some issues. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to actually turn it over to Councilman Glover. I just, before Councilman Glover, I could turn it over to you. I want to make a couple of maybe suggestions as well to Mr. Hammack with regards to ways to address some of the trash. I think one of the most effective things that I think that the city does with illegal dumping is deploys cameras, and certainly with regard to access to some of these areas, we may have an opportunity to post cameras on trees, poles, whatever the case may be, to identify the folks doing the illegal dumping for prosecution further later on down the line. So, of course, there's one end of it, which is, of course, picking up the trash, but certainly we want to discourage folks from thinking that the trash just goes away. We want to hold them accountable as well. So if there's something that you can bring back to the folks at CSX, I think that might be worth considering as one of the many solutions.
I think that's a great suggestion. We have worked in the past with DPW on deploying cameras at a few locations that were chronic illegal dumping. But I know that DPW at the time, this was years ago, had
only a few cameras. We had 2 that we deployed in Baltimore, so the resources may be greater now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Glover.
Thank you, Madam. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to my colleague for bringing this very, very important matter to light. My question is, how many times have you guys actually come before the council in the past regarding the matters of South Baltimore in reference to the coal coming through the neighborhood? I'm just curious to know because I remember the last hearing, I was there in person. I remember hearing a young lady speak, and she went back about 100 years of history in reference to the coal coming through the Curtis Bay area. So my question is, how long have you guys been asked to make adjustments prior to this council coming on board in reference to fixing what has been broken in the Curtis Bay community in reference to the coal?
Thank you for the question, Councilman. I've been with the company about 7 years, and I could say this is the first time that I've come before this body as it relates to the coal pier. I'm not aware of anything in the recent history prior to me joining the company that we were here on the coal pier.
Okay, and the reason why I ask because we do have a council now that's really involved. We care about the people, and sometimes we're like a nightmare you can't wake up from. You have individuals here that stand by our colleague. We're going to continue to push and push until the people in Curtis Bay get the quality of life they deserve. And the reason why I'm saying this because it seems like it's happening in Black and brown communities. I go back down to even in Virginia, the coal that's coming through like Newport News, Virginia, and some of the southern parts of Virginia. These are individuals that live in Black and brown communities, low income communities. And if we need, and you let me know if you need our assistance on this, but I don't know what we can do on a local level, but do we need to bring federal, colleagues to get involved in this because of the fact that, I'm hearing over and over again as my colleagues speak about what are we going to do, what's the timeline on a lot of this stuff, that it seems like nothing is really getting done. And I know that in Virginia, they're just starting to do like monitoring air pollution like around the Hampton roads and those terminals. So they're just starting to do these things. And it seems like we're just having these conversations in reference to coal during this council that's spearheaded by my colleague, Councilwoman Porter, where these issues should have been addressed probably a long time ago. So we want to work with you, but what I want to know is it best that we also bring in our federal partners? Because it seems as if, that we, from a council perspective, are coming to you guys and we're asking you guys to help the members, the families of the Curtis Bay area, and it seems like your hands are kind of tied.
Speaking for MDE, yeah, we'd certainly welcome a collaboration with our federal partners at EPA. I know that there are lots of things that EPA is doing that could help. For example, they've initiated a grant program for community associations to do environmental justice work and scientific organizations. So we've helped publicize that to our community partners, and we always are ready to join in a letter of support or application for the universities and community partners just to secure that money, which is a small part, but it's also an important part to get some of this done. So we'd love to talk more about how we can bring federal resources to bear, that now there are a lot more of them after the recent legislation, the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act. And so, yes, we definitely welcome that partnership to bring in federal support, funding and otherwise, right? Not just the money.
I really do appreciate it, because what I'm saying right now is that what I'm saying is there's been too many studies, but too little action. And we need to get on top of the action, because the lives in Curtis Bay matter. Black and brown people in Curtis Bay matter. We need to address this issue. And I just say, as a colleague of my Councilwoman, Porter, we stand behind her, 1,000%. we need to bring this to light, and we need to make sure that the residents, citizens of the Curtis Bay area are able to live in a community where it's free and it's healthy. So again, thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to speak. And just to say to you guys again, you know, we're going to be like a nightmare you can't wake up from, because we want to make sure that the people of Curtis Bay are getting what they deserve.
Thank you, Councilman Glover. Councilman Burnett.
Thank you. Mr. Hammock, one of the I thought key points that my colleague Councilmember Ramos raised was concerned about idling vehicles, burning diesel, et cetera. At your facility, when the trains arrive, do they idle? And are they diesel trains?
They are diesel trains, and they do idle. And that's, you know, another area, a part of our permit. You know, it's not just coal dust that we have to be cognizant of. At our facility or at other facilities, the diesel emissions, I think, you know, play a big part, not from our facility alone, but collectively from the community, is an issue that needs to be addressed as well.
And as a follow-up to both you and our representatives from MDE, are you monitoring diesel emissions from your facility?
I don't know how or if we do. I will follow up on that. I know that they're in the community in years past. The Baltimore Industrial Group or the South Baltimore Business Association had data as it relates to diesel emissions, and that may be something I can try to track down. I don't know if that was from independent monitoring or from community or state or local monitoring.
Okay, and you guys can answer.
Yeah, as part of the community air monitoring network, we have a diesel particulate monitor that we've been installing as part of that, and we're working with the Hopkins team on how to get that up and running. Just make sure it has power and internet access, and I know that they're securing other monitors. So yeah, that diesel particulate monitors are an important part of that. What we've seen in other communities where we've worked is that truck traffic and also the switcher trains that would be moving through a facility like CSX are really substantial sources of local air quality issues. And so in the context of a community partnership, we want to get, you know, monitoring in place to understand how much of this is diesel as opposed to the stationary sources, right? But then also as a broader policy matter where the state as a whole is bringing resources to replace diesel, especially old diesel vehicles with cleaner vehicles, especially electric trucks that are now becoming available. And so the state provides funding, MDE provides funding through the settlement we negotiated with Volkswagen for their emissions cheating scandal several years ago. We've used that money to replace diesel trucks in lots of communities. The Maryland Energy Administration provides money to replace diesel trucks. And now EPA is providing money to replace school buses with zero-emission vehicles. You're right that diesel traffic is a major source, and that has to be addressed. And one of the best ways to address it is to replace the trucks with cleaner vehicles.
And so I guess in summary, there is no monitoring of the current state of affairs for the last 100 years. So that's also, I think, something that is disconcerting. Can you walk me through, so you're looking at the idling trains, there will be monitoring of diesel emissions from the facility. How does that play into, does MDE largely regulate this at all? So if there's no monitoring, then I'm assuming that there is no regulation of this at the facility currently by MDE.
Regulation of engines like trains and trucks is generally an area where the federal government regulates, right? For example, the CAFE standards, that's a federal program. In most cases, states are preempted from having our own standards, except when we can adopt standards established by California. I'll have to check, that's definitely how it applies to cars and trucks. I'll have to check about switcher trains as well. But generally, for transportation sources like that are crossing state lines legally, it's usually a federal regulatory matter, but we do supplement that where we can.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I want to go back to a couple of things that MD, you guys brought up in your initial presentation, one of which you mentioned a report, but I don't know if there is no report yet, but do we anticipate any reports from the state or otherwise, or federal reports on the explosion?
So the government investigation was done by OSHA, because when there's an industrial accident, the safety regulators, either OSHA or the state counterpart, MOSH, they're the ones who come in to address that. In this case, because of the facility's federal licenses, it was the federal regulator, OSHA. And the result of their investigation was the citations. There wasn't an investigative report. CSX commissioned an investigation themselves, and I understand that's been provided to the council. We'd happy to provide a copy as well if that's helpful. That went into more detail than what OSHA produced. But those are the sort of forensic investigations into the cause of the explosion, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, that would be
We've
helpful.
instead investigated
if you
the
could
pollution
share.
consequences and then taken the enforcement action on that basis.
Yeah, it would be helpful if you could share that report. And then another thing that you said in your opening statement was that we were considering providing some opportunity for service or some service to the community in lieu of a fine. I'm curious who has been a part of those conversations, or if they have not yet begun, who we are pulling into those conversations.
Sure. So the settlement negotiations are just bilateral between the regulator and the company. Lawyers sitting across the table negotiating. But we're trying to bring into that in terms of opportunities for SEPs, supplemental environmental projects. That's what you call when you take what would be fines that just go to our budget and instead put them into the community project. We've been consulting with our community partners, some of whom are in the room, from the Community Curtis Bay Association, the South Baltimore Community Land Trust, just asking them, hey, what are some kind of projects that would be useful, where receiving some money would be what would help get them moving.
Got it. And of course, as we're thinking about fines and otherwise, the major consideration there is, as best as possible, deterring that behavior in the future, but then also in some ways compensating for the damage to the community. And as we've seen in the video, and I was unaware, there has been some property damages as a result. Is that something that's considered in those conversations?
Our authority is that we can levy fines for violating the regulations. We can't handle what would be sort of like a case that a citizen could take to say, my windows are broken, they need to be fixed. That would be outside of our sort of pollution regulatory authority. But we are trying to, get good things for the community out of this bad situation.
Okay. Thank you. Councilman Porter?
Thank you.
Yeah.
This question goes to MDE. What's the threshold of community support to deny a permit to CSX?
The threshold for us to deny a permit.
Mm-hmm.
That's tough to say, again, because they have the federal license to operate the facility. So we have our authority to require measures to reduce pollution. And so those are what we sort of put in the permit. Mm-hmm. And then, I don't know, Devin, you're a lawyer, you could maybe answer better than me about sort of authority beyond that.
So our authority is limited to the statutory requirements that the state legislature has passed, and because the facility is a federal facility, we are in some way, as Chris outlined earlier, preempted from full closure action. We can certainly penalize and use that as a deterrent, and that's what we're looking at doing through the settlement negotiations and the enforcement action.
Okay. And the same question would go to the city as well. What would be the threshold of denying any type of zoning permit that comes before the council or the administration?
Thank you, Councilwoman. I will bring that question back to the administration with the BMZA and get a response to you.
Okay, thank you so much. And then my last question has to deal with MDE. Your sole mission is to, to protect, the environment and protect the health of residents. Can you share how MDE has done that thus far for Curtis Bay residents?
Well, as we discussed, we haven't done enough, but what we're trying to do is partner with the community on improving air quality in the area. And one small part of that, but one very useful thing is deploying the air monitoring network. So we're trying to help wherever we can with that. And then also really inspect the facilities in this area, really pay a lot of attention to catch violations and to deter violations. There needs to be, improving quality of life in the community is a lot more than that, and we want to also help in other ways that we can. But that's our primary focus, is trying to improve air quality in the community that is facing environmental injustice and is overburdened by air pollution.
So we know that air quality is only one subset of the environmental hazards that encompass the environment. Can you speak to other ways that you all are protecting the residents of Curtis Bay, notwithstanding air quality?
Sure, we could follow up with more information from our colleagues who deal with land and water issues, but there are, there's a landfill in the area, there's a wastewater treatment plant in the area, there are other facilities that cause other types of pollution. And so our colleagues in those areas are doing similar things that we are, right, in terms of the enhanced compliance and trying to find opportunities to reduce pollution across all media. And we can follow up with more information from those colleagues as well. We just only have air in the room today.
Sure. So I just want to note that you just mentioned 5 different harms that is in this one particular community. And if you all are charged of protecting the environmental health of these residents, I think it's very underwhelming that they're not represented here today. They're not represented here today to talk through some of the ways that they are protecting the environmental health of Curtis Bay.
Oh, Councilwoman Porter, the hearing today was specifically about the CXX explosion. So had I had an opportunity to have bring a broader panel, I would have brought a broader panel based upon the fact that the council was wanting to hear about the CSX explosion. I brought my air director. But certainly, if the council would like further information about what our Land Management Administration and our Water and Science Administration are doing in the Curtis Bay area, I'll be happy to provide that.
And I thank you for that, sir. But the only reason why I'm expanding that line of questioning is because many times throughout your presentation and many times throughout your answers, you're speaking of ways that MDE is helping, not just the air quality. You're speaking of land use. I'm saying if you open that line of questioning, they should be here to report out to the community what they are doing to protect the environmental health of those in Curtis Bay. If that is if that is what your presentation entails.
Understood, Councilwoman Porter. That is why that the Land Administration and the Water Administration are actually part of the biweekly calls that we have with the community to address these issues.
Sure, and those are internal biweekly calls, not external biweekly calls with no external outcomes to the community. Is that correct?
No, the calls are with the community themselves and have external outcomes. The community actually brings the agenda to MDE as to what they want to hear.
Okay. Has there been any outcomes from MDE that have been presented to the community at large?
I think Chris just mentioned the various outcomes that we've done with regard to that. You want to continue?
Yeah, in terms of communicating not just with the the community representatives who join our calls, but the community as a whole. We joined the recent community association meeting. I believe it was 2 weeks ago. And we are going to be setting up the meeting for this permit to be open to the entire community, and we're eager to take every opportunity to talk to the community as a whole about what the problems are and how we can solve them.
Okay. Thank you. I look forward to it.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
So I did have a question about you mentioned that there were negotiations in lieu of fines. Less of a question, more of a statement, is that I would ask that considerations be made for investments that wouldn't happen otherwise. Often what we see are, offerings to, and I'm not, when fully disclosed, I have no idea what you're negotiating in Curtis Bay with, with the community or with CSX, but just noting that oftentimes these negotiations lead to investments that the city should be making in rec centers or parks, right? Things that we should be doing anyway. I think that if the level of severity of this incident and the ongoing harm, that if you're going to do in lieu of fines, then the investments should be comparable to the damage, both from a public health perspective to the residents for, residing here for over 100 years and experiencing the public health impacts, but two, so that we're not letting CSX off the hook by paying for things that aren't comparable to the damage. And there are ways to measure. There are definitely ways to measure and put a dollar amount to the public health damage that's been done to the environment, to the community, and that should be a part of your calculations. If they aren't, if they are, that's great to hear. If not, I'd like to know why they aren't, because I think large corporations often get off pretty easily when it comes to the fines that they pay. Obviously larger conversations about taxes and paying your fair share, not for this hearing, but just noting that we don't know the number, the amount of revenue that's coming in, but I'm sure it's in the millions and billions of dollars, and so the residents, the investment should be comparable to that, and so I would hope that we're looking at the larger picture when negotiating this, particularly given the scale of the problem that we know is not simply about just the explosion itself. Today we've talked about long-standing air pollution issues. We've talked about diesel emissions. We've talked about trash. All of these things are harming these communities, these residents every single day. And my hope is that's all a part of the consideration, because they got it, to be frank. And so whatever investments need to be made should reflect that total picture. And that's just what I would say. I don't know how you can respond. I know that you noted earlier that there are some restrictions in what you can say publicly, but it would be helpful to know what types of things are being considered in the first place.
Those are all good points, and I appreciate the input. And again, there's limits on what I can say publicly, but I'll note that just in terms of dollar values, the amount that we can assess in a fine is set in law. And just for your information, it's $25,000 per violation per day. And we identified 5 related to the explosion.
Wait, what?
Say it again, because you were mumbling. Say it again and take off your mask.
Sorry, yeah. In Maryland statute, our civil penalty authority, as it's referred to, is $25,000 per violation per day. And we identified 5 related to 5 violations of permits and regulatory conditions related to the explosion.
Per day.
Yeah, that's right, 5.
But it's treated as a one-day event versus a 365-day event.
Excuse me, we'll have an opportunity for testimony at the end. So if I ask that people just refrain from making comments. It doesn't help anyway. We can't hear you on the microphone. So please just hold your comments until the end. Councilman Burnett.
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you. I have one other question, and this is actually something that was asked in the last hearing, and I think it kind of stumped our OEM and our fire department, but it was with regard to after the explosion. We know that the explosion, of course, was a coal explosion, then sending coal materials into the air. Why there wasn't a designation that it was unsafe to either be in the area or breathe the air for some time. And I would imagine that's something that MDE would naturally have the ability to either monitor, determine, or otherwise, so that then our department can take proper precautions. That didn't happen this time, and I'm curious. I'm curious how we tend to handle those situations, and maybe how we should handle those situations going forward, so that we can have proper communication between the state and the city going forward.
Yeah, my understanding is that there was a communications breakdown on the day of, and yeah, we're eager to work with the city and also the company to clarify what ought to happen in this case. Yeah, so we'd love to participate in that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think it's just really important. We all know that coal certainly shouldn't ever enter the human body. But in a case like this, there's an explosion, it's in the air. We certainly want to make sure that residents in the area are aware of what's going on. The city has a notification system that can automatically send out this information. And we kind of just missed the ball here. And I think it starts with first identifying that it is a coal explosion and that maybe there are toxic materials in the air for any number of hours. I am no scientist, but I would imagine we have some sense of, for these incidents, how long it is unsafe to breathe the air. Folks in the back may argue that it is not ever safe to breathe the air, but that's a different conversation. Nonetheless, I think just by way of process going forward, I think it'd be helpful for MDE and the city to coordinate, until CSX decides to, transport solar panels and wind turbines, which hopefully one day they'll consider. We're dealing with coal, or until we decide for some reason to shut down CSX, we're going to be dealing with coal. And I think that threat of an explosion is always there. I want to make sure that every step of the way, the city and the state are on the same page so that we know what to do, residents know what to do, and we can respond immediately. So, thank you. Any further questions from my colleagues? Okay. Seeing no further questions, we are going to move into public testimony. For those that are here to testify, I have a couple of folks listed here. We have a sign up. There is a sign up in the back, so if you are here in person, you can sign up in the back to testify, and we'll collect those names and call you out one by one. For folks that are online, please use the raise hand function, and we will identify you. For those on the phone, when we do get to you at the end, we'll unmute you one by one, and each person will have 2 minutes to testify. Please state your name clearly for the record. If your testimony goes over 2 minutes, I ask that you submit a written testimony, just out of respect for all the people in this room. We've gone through this before, folks, so I hope you can please honor that for just respect of the committee. So first, I have here Michelle Rockwell. Will she be coming back? Okay. Next, I have Chris Heaney. And Chris, I believe you just spoke. If there's more that you'd like to add, you're welcome to.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak earlier. But I just want to point out something that
restate your name just to
Chris Heaney, Baltimore City resident, and testified earlier about the air quality monitoring study. Just one thing that may have gone overlooked. That graph that we showed with the PM10 levels, those were hourly concentrations. And the dots, when the wind was blowing from the coal terminal towards the community, went up into 1,000. Okay? Hourly levels where the air pollution is the PM10 level and up to 1,000 PM10. That's important context just to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Heaney. Shoshana Campbell. Two minutes. I'm joking.
I'm gonna try, man. It's hot out here. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Shoshana Campbell. I'm sorry, I had to say that fast. So, fireball from explosion, dust cloud, collapse zones. These words are on a map analyzing the CSX coal explosion, which is a report they put out themselves. What's left off that map is that it sits just 1,000 feet away from a rec center and homes, and businesses, a community. That's left out. And the fact that all of these are left out tell us volumes. It tell us that we felt what we felt and what we experienced on a daily. That from the perspective of this exploding coal company and even city, state officials, it is more convenient to avoid putting Curtis Bay on that map. Because if you acknowledge that communities exist, then it is harder to avoid the century-long histories of environmental justice marked by the explosion after explosion, fire after fire, toxic leaks and hazardous release one after another. And again, they were fireball from explosion, explosion dust cloud, collapse zone. These words should never be felt anywhere near a rec center or homes in any community where people live, where people work, where kids play. But if the past 100 years we have predict what's next to come, then we will have more explosions in Curtis Bay. And we will eventually follow what we've seen before, which is the history of Fairfield, Wegner's Points, and Hawkins Points, as fading memories of these lost communities. Now home for more cancer-causing incinerators, landfill, oil and gas tank farms, and coal piles. And I just want to refer real quick back to a question that was asked. It was asked, would you live in this community? The answer is no, because these communities won't exist if this continues. So, when we met here a few months ago on June 15th to hold a hearing on transparency and accountability for the explosion at CSX, the coal terminal that operates, again, less than 1,000 feet from a rec center in homes in Curtis Bay, neither CSX, the company responsible for this explosion, nor did the Maryland Department of Environmental show up.
Please conclude your testimony.
I provided education on the pattern of environmental and public health disasters in and around Curtis Bay for the past centuries. The pattern of disasters follow a pattern of failure by officials and to hold anyone truly accountable, leaving communities with toxic mess, but without the tools or resources to clean it up. As I read again, oh God, I hate to do this to you guys, I really do.
You can always submit your testimony.
I know, and I gotta submit it here though, because people told me to come out here and do this. All right, thank you so much, sweetie, but you can have your time, because we all have time. All right, so again, today I have come again to talk about those amazing headlines that kept being referenced, which is, again, 100-year history. So here we go. In 1913, fire spared terrorists. Series of explosions takes villains of Wegner's Point, which doesn't exist anymore. 1927, 100 shells are exploded as blaze at Curtis Bay Depot route, 150 families. 1936, fire at Ordnance Depot. 1943, 10 workers die in an explosion at Ordnance Road. 1969, 70,000 gallons of oil spilled in Curtis Bay. 1972, FMC indicted on pollution charges. 1977, threats of a rare cancer looms the cocoon workers. 1979, 700 persons evacuated as tank cars overturned in Fairfield, which doesn't exist anymore, filled with acid and chlorine. 1984, chemical blast rocks Fairfield. 1989, Fairfield Chemical Companies accused of selling chemicals to Saddam Hussein for poison gas. 1992, Hawkins Point Medical Waste Incinerator emits high levels of hydrogen chloride, pays a fine. They also have a lot of methane that's happening there, which we have found out about recently. 1996, explosion at a chemical company injured 6 storage tank tops blown off at a plant. 1998, Wegner's Point area, which doesn't exist anymore, ranked 9th in US for chemical accidents. Accidents. These aren't regulated. These are accidents, right? A very dangerous place, environmental group says, very dangerous. 2000, Shell Oil Company and Wegner's Point violates Clean Air Act. 2004, medical waste incinerators violate mercury emissions limit 400 times in 2 years past. 2006, SASU released cancer-causing benzene and fails to notify local and national authorities. 2012, tanker strikes CSX coal pier in Baltimore, causing over $5 million in damages. 2016, Camaro Water Solutions, Inc. released 6,339 pounds of ferrous chloride as extreme hazardous substance. 2017, sheltered in place, ordered after chemical leaks in Curtis Bay. July 1st, 2001, OSHA investigates CSX for pattern retaliations against workers for reporting safety concerns. December 2021, long before today's explosion, Curtis Bay residents complained about black dust from the CSX coal terminal. March 2022, employee who dies in 3 alarm blazing at the fuel facility in Curtis Bay is identified as Baltimore official says that is the fire that happened. July 2022, OSHA cites CSX for 9 serious violations in Curtis Bay for that explosion. For those of you in the position to ask yourselves, if this isn't enough, what is it going to take for officials to take environmental justice seriously in Curtis Bay?
Thank you, Shoshana. Next up, we have Angie Schoenfeld.
Hello, my name is Angela Schoenfeld, and I was here at the last hearing, and I talked about how I felt that day inside my house with the pressure before the explosion. Today, and that's all on record, I don't want to go reiterate that, but today I will read you notes, and hopefully I won't get emotional, from my kids, who are both 9, and this is their words, not mine. And I asked them to just, because they wanted to be here today, and I said, no, you're going to be bored. So Ariel, who I mentioned, has issues with loud noises, like balloons and fireworks. She said, this is how I felt. I felt scared, and I cried. I cry so much. I could not move at all at the moment. And that, it's hard to say. And that's how she felt. She literally was not there. Like mentally was not there in my living room, where it should be a safe place. I had to tap her chin and look her in the eye to bring her back from wherever she was. She was not there. I will tell you that they went to summer camp this year, and both of my kids, they went during 4th of July week. Both of my kids had to have upwards of 3 to 4 counselors to calm them down because of the loud noises. And that's never happened. Like Ariel, yes. Her sister, no. But 3 kids, and they were away. I was an hour away from them. I didn't find out till the end of the week. Ariana said, my name is Ariana. I felt scared, honestly. I was worried, but I didn't. But she says she's fine now. I wish I could move, but I can't. And we live directly up 2.5 blocks from where the explosion happened. My husband was driving at the moment of the explosion, and he said that the back of the car lifted up off of the ground.
Thank you, Ms. Schoenfeld. Can you please?
That is crazy. You know, like we don't have monitoring. You know, and CSX did their own investigation. Nobody investigated them outside of their own company. They investigated themselves. Come on. We got to do better.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up, I have Nicole Fabricant.
So Nicole Fabricant, professor of anthropology at Towson University. An explosion at CSX facility was the second largest coal export pier on the East Coast. This happened on December 30th, and this is just the latest example of the city working in lockstep with private industry and prioritizing their interests while sacrificing residents' health. We've heard tremendous stories tonight about the cost to the local community. I've articulated at other city council hearings the ways in which, when we ask our classroom down at Curtis Bay at Ben Franklin, High School, Benjamin Franklin, how many of you experience respiratory illnesses, the entire class raises their hands. Coal dust, we don't even have to ask what's in coal. I think that's clear, right? It contains heavy metals that are lethal, including selenium, chromium, arsenic, mercury, and lead. I can go on and on naming how harmful these chemicals are. Dust flies off of the piles being loaded and unloaded onto the CSX Chesapeake Coal Terminal Pier, while a park and a recreation center lie directly in front of it. So when the question was asked about raising kids in that community, or would you live, there's no way anyone would want their children playing amidst coal dust and other heavy toxins. But coal is just one of the many harmful industries. The city has utilized these lands not just as a dumping grounds for toxins, but also to expand waste facilities, from oil to gas to trash to medical waste incinerators to landfills have wreaked havoc upon soil, waterways, and lands. The entire Curtis Bay community suffers from policies that concentrate toxins in their neighborhoods and ultimately inside of their bodies. The entire Curtis Bay essentially is asking for several things from the council, right? From members of the council. So I think the Baltimore Sun responded to this incident by saying this should be a wake-up call for Baltimore to stop housing coal for export, which is exacerbating climate crisis, and that was mentioned tonight. The Sun missed the mark. They sidestepped the local toxic disaster and issues of racism and classism, which they might have been able to mitigate by holding our leaders accountable to local communities. Instead, they attempt to address this as a global disaster that's beyond their capacity to do anything about. The op-ed missed an opportunity to connect coal to other harmful industries in the area. The extractive economy is tied to our waste infrastructure that wreaks havoc upon Black and brown bodies and are supported and funded by our politicians working in lockstep with the private sector. The truth is plain to see on the ground. Residents are tired. They've been exposed to serious illnesses and to hollow promises. We want environmental reparations. $25,000 is simply not enough. We know the revenue that CSX has accrued. We know how much money they have profited off of essentially housing export-oriented coal where the community has not benefited at all. So, okay, we're asking for two things. One, we want today to suspend operations. We have heard that it is unsafe. There's multiple scenarios tonight that have illustrated that it is not safe. We also want our elected officials to pass policy to prohibit coal in Baltimore. Prohibit it. Other cities have done it. We want it here and we want it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fabricant. Next up, we have Greg Sawtell.
Good evening, everybody. Greg Sawtell with the Community of Curtis Bay Association, member of the executive board. I'm going to try to organize my thoughts. First, just apologies for several times interrupting the flow of the proceedings, but it's a very intense issue that's been boiling up now for 9 months, but we've heard from so many that this is a centuries-long issue. Mostly going to respond to some points that have been made and attempt to correct the record in some instances. First, there's been, I think, some confusion or misstatements made about the coal pile and this being an unprecedented event. The explosion, we've never experienced an explosion of that magnitude before at CSX at the coal pile. what people are saying is that it presents an everyday threat. That's been well documented. It's been reported, it's in the public record. Complaints have been made to MDE going back at least a decade. The photos you saw today, there may have been some confusion. Those were not photos, some of the photos were day of. Most of those images were from days before and after. That's a reflection of the daily, regular operations of this facility. It's not an abnormal, it's not unprecedented that residents are finding coal dust in their lungs on the sides of their homes. So MDE has demonstrated that they have the capacity, they have the statutory authority to assess a $25,000 per day fine for the CSX coal terminal presenting a public nuisance, to use their language. What you saw is clearly a public nuisance. It's been reported to MDE as a nuisance going back at least a decade. This is the first instance of MDE issuing a fine. We're asking the question again on the record, and we've asked it directly to MDE. What is the actual basis for assessing a $25,000 a day fine for the explosion and the nuisance that posed, but not for what residents have been reporting every day? This is not the first time that anyone is hearing these reports. Make no mistake about it. They're on the record. We're putting it on the record again. There's been a willful avoidance of addressing the complaints. And I think we've heard echoes of that. Not enough has been done. To put that more plainly, the issue has been actively avoided.
If you could please.
I'm going to wrap up, right? Okay. A claim was made that communication is needed between CSX and the Curtis Bay community. Curtis Bay residents have proactively, again, this is on the record, it's one of the testimonies that was submitted to council. May 11th, resident issued an email to Rebecca Hensley, who does work for CSX to this day, I believe. No response has been made up to that point. We don't need a special email address to communicate. Okay, it's, again, active avoidance by CSX to residents. We just need to state that very plainly for the record. It's active avoidance. So I think the thing we want to highlight the most that we've heard tonight is, and this report was published on July 29th from CSX. We're on August 24th. Okay, so there's been nearly a month gap in between the time that the new findings were published and when residents have actually have a chance to look at it. Okay, but the big finding, methane is related to the explosion. MDE has acknowledged they have not looked at and they're continuing not to look at and have any permit requirement for the levels of methane. For us, that's clear as day as to why we need an immediate suspension of activities at the facility. We can do that. We can require a suspension of activities at the facility if we actually believe in the mission, which is to pursue safety. We can do that. We can all call for it tonight. We can leave this meeting with a clear directive, which is to say we can't allow it to continue operating given the findings. Methane is the cause. Methane is not being permitted. It's not being monitored by our state regulators. Enough. We have to stop this. Longer term, Baltimore City Council, to be clear, has the authority to provide a solution to this through an ordinance which would prohibit the exportation of coal in Baltimore City. Other cities have done it, Richmond, California. Residents in Curtis Bay have started to talk to residents in Richmond, California to learn. First thing, it didn't take an explosion for the residents and the Council of Richmond, California to decide that coal is part of the past and not part of the future. It didn't require that. If it requires it in Baltimore, so be it. But if we don't take action and our council does not take action to take measures that are within reach, then we have to be honest and we have to say we're not actually pursuing health and environmental justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sawtell. Next up, we have Ray Conaway. I think Ray is outside. We'll come back to Ray. Next up, we have Andy Hines. Yeah, that's fine. We'll come back. Andy Hines.
Hello. Hello. Thank you for letting me speak. My name is Andy Hines. I live in the 1400 block of Park Avenue. I applaud your questioning of MDE and CSX today, but as people have spoken about the history of this problem, it was the city council that created this problem over 100 years ago, and you own the problem, and we as residents of the city own the problem together. We can't treat our neighbors like this, and we need to do better. And you really need to address the land use issues. the city council created the land issues when they threw all these thriving communities under the bus and said the whole area is an industrial sacrifice zone. We need to fix that. You need to claw back this land and give it back to the community, site by site, facility by facility, facility by facility. This maybe is the first one. So I'd like to make 3 specific recommendations that came to my mind just as a taxpayer here. The first one is that the city council should right now ask for a mitigation plan from CSX. They know what is happening at the facility. They know where the wind's blowing and where things are going. They should be working on a mitigation plan right now, and they should hand it to you very soon, because there's no reason for people to be breathing stuff that could be covered or mitigated in some way. That's absolutely criminal, and the city should be at risk, should be liable for not taking action sooner. The second thing is for the Office of Sustainability to actually take an active role in the sustainability of the city and lead a plan that identifies when we're going to shut this down, okay? 100 years ago, these communities were sacrificed. Now they're being sacrificed for no good reason whatsoever. They're being sacrificed for further harm to the global community. So the Office of Sustainability should find out where this coal is going, why those communities need the coal, and we need to get our foreign relations part of the city involved, and it's an all-hands thing on deck to help the Office of Sustainability figure out when we're going to shut this down and let CSX transport other things. And then
Thank you, sir. If you could.
Yeah, I just have one more thing that I'd like to ask for, and shoot, it slipped my mind what it was, but oh gosh, I wish I could remember what it was, but I would have remembered if you hadn't checked me on the time. Yeah, okay, I'll stop. But yeah, I'll give you written testimony about the third thing that we should do,
Sure.
that I would like you to do as a taxpayer.
If you want to let me know later on, I'll make sure we communicate that to the rest of you.
Sure. Thanks for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Mr. Hins. Next up, we have, Ray. Mr. Conaway.
Thank you. Again,
No
Rick.
relation.
No, you don't have the A. Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Listen, I think what we heard very clearly is the common theme throughout the residents in the community that there needs to be something that takes place in regards to accountability on this issue. First of all, I just want to say that it's very, in some sense, I am thankful that CSX is here, because this is the first time that CSX and Curtis Bay has been in the same room, period. And I think, to your point, Councilwoman, that the fact that an email has just been set up now speaks to their theory on what the engagement looks like with the community. I moderate the Curtis Bay Community Association meetings every second Thursday, and we have not had representatives here, representatives from CSX at those meetings. I hope that can change moving forward. Secondly, in regards to the accountability piece, we cannot allow tonight's meeting go on without accountability being at the center. It needs to be something that is appropriate for the facility and also appropriate for the harm that it has done to our community. In addition to that, the fact that, in essence, this has been a hit and run. CSX hit, they ran, they finally came here to the hearing, and we hope that they will not run anymore. In essence, what happened was CSX played Santa Claus, quite literally. In December, they left us cold after the explosion. We don't want that to happen ever again. And we are very intent to making sure, Mr. Hammock, that you communicate with us. We are very communicative, and we are only intentional about this because we want the best for our residents. So thank you all for this, and I appreciate the council giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conaway. Next up, we have Dave Arndt.
Sorry, I'm short.
No worries.
My name is Dave Arndt. I'm a resident of Baltimore. And when I look at this, I look at environmental, climate change, and social justice all intersecting at one spot. When we look at Curtis Bay, this is an area that has 12 facilities, as said, of industrial complexes, several chemical factories, incinerators. We have the trash incinerator. We have several highways, warehouses with lots of trucks. This really has all been done by design. Curtis Bay is a fence line community. It is a sacrifice zone. This has been done by design. We have to stop this. We can stop this, and we just have to work together in stopping this. Other things that we really have to look at here from the stuff that is coming up today is there's methane being released. Well, the solution is to just vent it out faster. Methane is a greenhouse gas. We should be capturing it at the least. If it's going to be here, should do something proactive rather than just releasing it. So let's make good solutions here. Secondly, if we look at coal, as stated earlier, there's a lot of heavy metals, mercury, lead, arsenic, other compounds with it. What is the other solution? We're going to water it down. Where does this water go? It goes out into the bay. It goes out into our harbor. We've got to think about all these things that we're doing here and have a better solution here. In the last 5 weeks, there's been 5 once-in-a-thousand-year rain events in the U.S. What happens if that comes here to Baltimore? Is Curtis Bay ready for this? Baltimore, are we ready for this? Do we have plans? The answer is no. We need to do better than this.
Thank you, Mr. Arndt. If you could begin to conclude your testimony.
There's a couple more things here that I really want to say. And one of the big things is the city council and everybody says we now care, but we keep on doing the same things. We still operate our big incinerator in Baltimore. If we care, we'd shut this down immediately. There's a crematorium that wants to be built in Govins. We should be shutting that down and preventing it. We can do this, Baltimore. Let's just do it. We do care. Let's make action happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arndt. Next up, we've got Melanie Thomas.
All right, good evening. Can you hear me? Good evening, Chair and council members. I appreciate you all being here. I'm Melanie Thomas, and I am with the South Baltimore Community Land Trust and also a resident in Curtis Bay. So we've heard so many things shared today, and the main thing that I want to talk about really quickly is the fact or the mention of no level of coal being safe, right? So why do we have to suffer? Residents, homeowners, businesses, and most importantly, our children deserve to have answers. We've finally gotten some answers now, right? At the Land Trust, we are investing millions into housing that is directly adjacent from the facility, okay? The city, our mayor and various community partners, Parks and Recreation, they are investing $9 million to revitalize us, for our community to have a vibrant and beautiful community space and community recreation center. There are other community-driven leaders and investors and businesses that are putting millions of dollars into infrastructure to support our rapidly developing community. All of what I just described cannot function and coexist with a hazardous facility within a few feet from a residential space, right? You talk about the facility and us being in proximity of 17 other facilities and hazards. That is not a badge of honor. That is a disgrace, right? We should be taking radical action now to address how these companies are harming community health as well as threatening our very existence. Venting of methane, you've heard it from other people, that is not a solution at all. That is releasing more toxins into our community. That's adding another layer of threat, not a solution. This last instance, and Shoshonda mentioned a last instance and the last occurrence of 2022 of there being a hazard. There hasn't been a year where the community has had a break, right? When is that going to change?
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. If you could
All right,
begin
one
to
last
conclude.
thing. So we've heard statements about how we're going to get this issue resolved by putting in different regulations and whatnot. If no level of coal is safe in a community, no level of restrictions or permits or whatever it is going to remedy an issue. Coal is combustible, period. It's hazardous. Simple thing, we cannot continue to suffer. We will not continue to be a sacrifice zone, and radical change really requires radical action. So what we need to do is suspend the operations of this facility after these findings have just come out. Methane, really? We have to do better. We have to take radical action if we are really serious about the health of all the residents that are here and the people that we so-called work to protect and build a better future for. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Next up, we've got Donna Chappelle. One more time, Donna Chappelle. All right, next we'll move on to Carlos Sanchez.
Hello, everyone. I'm a youth leader in South Baltimore, and I'm here to talk about and remind everyone about the dangerous environment that we as residents are forced to live in. Myself, along with some peers, went to door in Curtis Bay, getting their thoughts and experiences about being around this coal pile. And everyone we spoke to were angry that this happened, and it hasn't been the first time, and not the first time that they tried to speak about it, and nothing has been done to improve the situation. Today I have an audio recorder of a resident who couldn't be here today that I want everybody to listen to.
Well, for me, I was working, it just felt like a bomb went off. My whole computer shook, like a lot of the windows of the neighborhood burst out. It was really scary. We literally thought like maybe a house blew up. We thought maybe like from an oil leak or something. I have 3 kids and they were scared. They like dropped to the floor. My youngest thought she was gonna blow up. Sometimes when we go outside, she thinks that there's gonna be like a fire or like something in the neighborhood might blow up. They like get scared. Like if like there's a pop out here on the street, like they pop down thinking that a bomb went off. So yeah, it's just scary living next to it. And then also you can see it like coming up in like the dust coming up in the air, like, and it gets on our cars, like the soot and stuff just ends up landing on the car. So you know it's in the air as well. So.
And do you have anything that you want to say to your city council person?
Just care about South Baltimore too. Like our health matters. I'm sure it's affecting the people that live down here. This part of the city really does just get forgotten, and they should be doing something about it. It's just completely overlooked, probably because they don't necessarily live here.
Can you imagine that? Being in a community that where you feel that has been forgotten, living there for years and not knowing that you're being, or knowing that you've been forgotten. Like the resident says, their kids grown to believe that they must duck and get down when they hear a pop. How long will these kids have to live in fear before our official takes a stand and say no more? No more residents living in fear of not knowing when something will blow up again. No more kids being traumatized by the said pop. No more of those headlines that Shoshonda spoke of. We as youth are supposed to be the future of this city, of this state and nation. But we can't do that when our futures aren't assured. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. Last up that we have from signups, and if folks do want to testify, we'll call you up at the end, is Nicole Labruto.
Thank you, Council. My name is Nicola Brito. I am a doctor of anthropology. I teach at Johns Hopkins University. I direct the Medicine, Science, and Humanities undergraduate program, and I'm a resident of Baltimore City in your district. I find it really, as a social scientist who's trained in political economy and political ecology, when I hear Mr. Hammack describe the crisis in the Ukraine and a somehow benevolent activity that the CSX Corporation is having in helping our European allies have coal, what I hear is that business is very good. Business to Europe is very good. Things are going well for CSX. And for the first time in at least 7 years since Mr. Hammack's been associated with the organization, they're being held accountable. And now we hear that they're willing to work with community. Now we hear those words. We want to work with community. And yet, from the other testimonies that we've heard, there has been no outreach to the South Baltimore Community Land Trust. There has been no outreach to the Curtis Bay Community Association. There has been no outreach to Professor Heaney at Johns Hopkins doing this research. There has been no effort on their part. So whatever kind of community work they're claiming to want to do is clearly on their terms and is clearly absentee entirely. Now that they're held accountable, we hear those words. And we also know that CSX has been identified by OSHA as a repeat offender of retaliation against workers who complain against unsafe conditions at the CSX facility. As recently as July 2021, OSHA found a clear, quote, demonstrated pattern of retaliation against workers. So they don't protect their own workers. I don't think we can count on them to protect this community. If the Maryland Department of Environment's hands are tied, as we've learned they are repeatedly, the federal government on one side, local city governance ordinances on the other side, they're unable to fulfill their role of protecting this community. Let city government protect this community. Let city government act to enact the ordinance that Greg Sawtelle described and shut it down. Shut it down. Shut down the CSX coal pier by prohibiting the export from the site. If that's where the power lies, it is with you. And so, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Bruno. I don't see any other names on the list. If there is anyone else that is here in person and would like to testify, please feel free to come to the mic. Oh, please, by all means. If you could just restate your name for the record.
Yeah, it was just the third thing that I was going to ask the city to take action and do is to start a different, I don't know how land use planning is being done right now for South Baltimore, but basically restart it, put the communities there at the center of it, and make the objective of that land use planning first what the community wants, because we all know that that means we'll get a good solution if you put the communities in charge, and as a taxpayer, that's what I want. But one of the objectives should be clawing back the industrial, massive zoning that was done, increasing setbacks from industrial facilities, and piece by piece by piece, giving the land back to the communities and giving them some space between the facilities that remain there. Thank you.
Thank you. Before you leave, sir, I just wanted to, can you just state your name for the record, just so we can?
Yeah, it's Andy Hins. I live in Baltimore City, Park Avenue.
Thank you, Mr. Hins. Seeing no more testimony in the chambers, do we have any testimony online? I see no hands. If you would like to testify, please use the raise hand function. We're going to go to the first caller. Good evening. Are they unmuted? So for the caller, you have to unmute yourself, but if you would like to testify, please let us know. Anyone else who is on the Zoom or WebEx, whatever this is, please use the raise hand function and we'll call upon you. All right, seeing no further testimony, I want to thank certainly CSX for coming here today. It takes, frankly, bravery, because I think that you see there's a ton of frustration from the community. They certainly want to see change. Certainly, we want to see change. I appreciate MDE as well for coming out and having an opportunity to answer some of the questions and give us some of the insights on how you guys look at these problems. I look forward to continued partnership with you guys. Of course, city agencies, we know you guys. Appreciate you as always. I want to turn it over to Councilwoman Porter for some closing statements.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the community for coming out today. It is not lost upon my office, it's not lost upon my colleagues of what we have to do moving forward related to the enforcement of this issue. Mr. Chair, I actually have to respectfully disagree. It is not bravery to sit here and be, to share the harmful ways that CSX has impacted the community. I don't call it bravery, I don't call it courageous. I called it just being a good city partner and a good moral partner in the city where you're doing business, where you're doing revenue off the backs and the souls of the people of this city. I want to thank MDE for coming today. I thank you all. I think it's really important that we have increased enforcement capabilities through MDE. Again, I'm disappointed that we are just now starting this conversation, as you shared, as you shared over, your testimony today, that we're just starting this conversation of environmental justice for the Curtis Bay community. It should not take an incident like this to bring forth this change. I believe that MDE is charged with protecting the environment and protecting the environmental health of our neighbors and constituents. And so I'm hoping that we can move forward from this and have increased regulation on industry partners like CSX that are known to cause harmful acts to neighbors in Baltimore City. And then lastly, with the mayor's office, I'm hoping that, Nina, I've spoken to you via text message. We are going to actively move forward with hopefully seeing what the city can do and how the city can enforce the leverage and suspension of operations of CSX. I think it is very clear here that not only are we are at a crossroads here, but we need, as an administration and as a council, we need to represent the moral documentation and the moral fabric of what is actually happening in these communities. So I look forward to working with you in the next couple of weeks to see how that can be executed immediately. Thank you.
Thank you. This meeting is in recess.